discussion and the time is 7 p.m. Dr. Richardson, there are some number of items in the
Number
table
of
file.
items, yes. In the table file, you're going to find, first of all, an update packet for you on the issues around the school discipline policies and citizenship handbook. There's some additional suggested rewrite for school weapons policy 501. Thanks to Noel, who shared it with some information today. There's also a revision of the third page of that, which is reviewing and making a fix on the chart that is at the end of the handbook, and also the addition of an identification of when we have either recommended or possible expulsion at the high school or the middle school. So you can see, I think, in a little more detail which things are recommended for us to go forward with possible expulsion versus those things where expulsion is simply possible. And then if there's a modification between high school and middle school. The next piece then is a flow chart to let you take a look at the discipline process for serious offenses. And this, we took a look at the one from Hudson. Ours is fairly different than the Hudson version, but it, I think, describes pretty accurately the process that we're using right now and would be proposing to use as we move forward into this new set of policies. And then finally, on the yellow sheet, there is a revised vehicle registration sheet that includes information from Board Policy 527 concerning the ability to search vehicles, and also the impact in terms of what the violations will be if an individual is found to have some kind of contraband in their vehicle. Beyond that, then there are a number of recs for employment in terms of appointments and decreases and change in assignments, as well as a contract for superintendent of schools.
Okay, thank you very much. If there's no objection, we'll add these items to the agenda as we move forward. We now have an opportunity for public comment. This is a chance for anyone residing in the Northfield Public School District to address the board. I'd like to remind the public that this is a listening opportunity for the board and not a time to debate an issue. Also, the Minnesota Government Data Practice Act prohibits comment about specific student matters even without naming the student in open session. This includes the public comment portion of our meeting. The board respects and values input on student matters, but it relates to a specific student or to a specific student matter. Such input must be heard by the appropriate personnel, such as the building principal or superintendent, and not during an open meeting of the school board. With that being said, is there anyone here who would like to address the board? Okay. Seeing no one come forward, we will move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet minutes from the regular school board meeting held on Monday, April 11, 2016. Is there a motion to approve these minutes? Moved by Jeff. Second? Second by Fritz. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes of the regular school board meeting held on Monday, April 11, 2016, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Announcements and recognitions. Dr. Richardson.
Okay, I just have one this evening, and that is concerning Sibley Elementary. Their school student council, under the direction of Becky Haar and Nancy Fox, raised almost $3,000 for the Ronald McDonald House. 700 of that came from the Northfield VFW and the auxiliary. The goal was to purchase 50 pillows for the Minneapolis house. The company, My Pillow, heard about the fundraiser, offered their pillows at a discounted price, so that based on the order, it looks like Sibley will be able to send pillows to 3 different Ronald McDonald houses in the Twin Cities and possibly one in Rochester. So they're going to get, I think, about double their money out of what they're going to be able to purchase pillows. So very nice piece, and really nice that we have someone locally that is connected to My Pillow and was able to work that piece out for us too. So.
Is there board members have anything? I do have one thing. So it's with sadness that we announce retirement of Ellis Lisney. Ellis, for the past 14 years, as many of you know, has been the man behind the camera, taping our school board meetings. In fact, this is really his second retirement. Ellis began teaching in 1970 at Northfield Middle School as a math teacher and then moved into the position of media specialist until he retired in 2001. In 2002, he came out of retirement to serve the district when we were able to begin taping school board meetings that could later be viewed on the district website and NTV. Little did anyone know at the time that he would be doing it for 14 years. We were fortunate that Ellis was willing to take on this position. His dedication and commitment to ensuring that the tapes of our board meetings are available for viewing has been a significant and invaluable way for our community to stay abreast of things happening in our schools. It is with sincere gratitude and great admiration that we thank Ellis for his 46 years of service to Northfield schools. And I think my fellow board members will agree that it won't be the same when we look out in the audience and not see Ellis behind the camera. So, Ellis, we wish you all the best. So we will move on then to items for discussion and report. We begin this evening with caseload workload for special education teachers. Dr. Richardson.
All right. And I'm going to just start all of these pieces out because we have a lot of these tonight, and we've talked to everybody about how they're going to really focus on a very finely tuned presentation, about 10 to 15 minutes long, plus questions. So, and because as you see the number of different items that we have, even at that, that's going to take us a while. I think the important part of this discussion tonight is that Cheryl's going to talk about the work that she and her committee have been working on over this last year, which is really tied to a new Minnesota rule that required us to do a caseload study. And as because of that, we actually created a new policy which implemented that piece. So over the course of this last year, Cheryl and staff members have been looking in great detail at the staffing numbers, at the number of hours that are available in the day for each individual, and looking very seriously at how we can approach trying to make sure that we have the right number of hours and the right number of staff to do the job. So Cheryl, it's all yours.
Thank you for that summary, Dr. Richardson. School board members, thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening and talk about the work that the committee completed for the workload caseload, relooking at the workload caseload for special education services. As you know, like Dr. Richardson said, we were required to adopt a new policy that gave us more guidelines on our workload caseload for specific groups of students. That is the special education, what we call resource room students, students with mild to moderate disabilities. All other categories or disability groups of students who receive services for more than 50% of their school day, that is defined, as well as the caseloads for early childhood special education. So we didn't need to look at that, but we did need to look at those students that with mild to moderate disabilities that have served less than 50% of the school day. We had, as you see in your packet, we had a group of individuals from across the district, from across the buildings, representing each of the departments in those buildings. We had a nice representation, and we met 4 times this year. The last meeting was just after school today, and so I do have like the final summary from the group as well from today to add to our minutes. As you know, because we need some specific caseload limits, it's important for us to look at data very carefully, and that data is described in that policy that we have to look at: direct minutes, indirect minutes, the number of minutes that are available during the school day to serve students, as well as the number of minutes that are available to serve students as well. One of the pieces that we have been looking at over the course of the year has been that there has been a shift in our caseloads. We've had an increase of students. We've had 80 student increase over 2 years, which is significant. We have had a change in our amount of minutes available to our elementary students because about a decade ago, the secondary special education teachers were able to have a case management time. And a few years ago, our elementary teachers were then allowed to have that same case management time. That has impacted our ability to develop the workload or caseloads that have been necessary to keep up with the growing demands in special education. So creating those caseloads in the elementary level, we have to align that time. And so it's been difficult to calculate that. We decided to use a calculation method this year that has been proposed by the Minnesota Department of Education from a workload group. That process was used also across many other districts that use the same system, and that system created a workload or caseload that you see in your packet. The caseload limits that really came about really showed that we needed to possibly increase our caseloads, or decrease our caseloads and increase our FTE to serve those students significantly. And that's why I'm here before you tonight, is because of that significant amount that would be needed, and that would be an increase of 6.7 FTE if we were to follow that workload process. That calculation. And that was very concerning to us. And even as a caseload group, it was concerning to the group as well, that calculation. So with that calculation saying that we needed 6.7, which would mean a significant impact on the budget at this time, we felt that it needed to come forward to the school board for you to review. We looked at many options to resolve the issue with meeting the needs of students. So increasing the FTE, of course, is one of the last options that we would want to consider at this time. Our first option, we really think that a due process clericals being added to each of the elementaries and the secondary buildings, a half-time person for each, would allow the case managers to have that support to do the scheduling and the due process work that they do during their case management time. Scheduling meetings takes an awful lot of time and impacts the other work that they are able to do in preparation and doing the work with other teachers in consultation and such. That is one way we could possibly move forward. The caseload committee also looked at other possibilities, looking at doing evaluation teams, having even a case facilitator that might lead that evaluation team. However, we believe that that might also create an increase in FTE in order to be able to do that. The caseload committee was not ready to move forward with that about a month ago, and we did not go forward with looking more deeply into that option at this time. We believe it would take away from the case manager's ability to really get to know the students through the evaluation and be able to serve them better. That is something that in the future we could look at. It would also impact our school psychologists. We have a full school psychologist at each building, and we think that's an important model to continue to use. Other pieces with this is we really think that in talking with other directors, that some of the calculations in the workload process this year are things that we want to re-look at over the course of next year. We think it would be good and wise to do that and not take this first glance at using this calculation. That we believe, and even the committee believe, that it would be good to take some time to re-look at it and look at the process again next year. There's some indirect time of teachers that is in that calculation that may have skewed our outcome for that. Also, our teachers believe that there are some other things that we might be able to delve into yet this spring and into the fall, and some of that is doing some work on our models of delivery, the models of delivery of service to our students, looking at different ways, like the high school, looking at ways that the scheduling is done for students between general ed and special ed, and really working through that and maybe looking at that a little differently. So that's one way we could attack this problem at this time. Are there any questions?
Board members, are there questions for Sharon?
Julie, I have a question.
Yes, good.
Just a clarifying question. Is it the case that the number of FTEs that the tool came up with is actually kind of not what you wish you could have, or is it just that it's so high that it's financially insupportable?
It's really so high that it's concerning, and about its accuracy, and also the piece that I failed to mention, which I should mention, is ongoing. We have to think about maintenance of effort. In special education, we have to maintain the same level of spending from year to year, and with that kind of a significant increase, I would be very, very concerned about maintenance of effort over time. And especially if we really were not solid in our understanding of that calculation and being able to move forward, it just doesn't make good sense at this time. And I think that maintenance of effort is something that even the committee understood, that and looking at that dollar amount is very, very significant, and we don't take that lightly.
Got it. So it's inaccurate and impossible.
Right, right,
Okay.
right.
Well, I'm not sure that we think that it's inaccurate. I think that it's the first time that the tool has been used.
Got it.
So,
There's
I mean,
pieces
this
of
is
it.
a new tool that has
So
been
you
available
wouldn't
this
you
year.
wouldn't want to take the risk that it was inaccurate, because then you
Exactly.
end up having to maintain it.
Right, we
Got
have to
it. So
maintain
it's not
it.
that you,
Mhm.
it's not that you've concluded that it's inaccurate, it's just that it might be.
We still have to balance between that required FTE to meet the IEP minutes and goals, and the services that are required, with balancing it with what are some other models or service delivery models that we could possibly implement in order to still meet those needs at a high level, and meet it with appropriateness.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like you haven't exhausted all conversation about options, but you're giving us the heads up about what you found, some of the options you've explored. What I missed was, what's the timeline? Do we anticipate that we're gonna need to make some significant changes before the next academic year?
Yes, it would still be before the next academic year, and so that's why the timing is of the utmost importance, because we have to be able to make those staffing decisions.
And
Board members, any questions? Fritz?
I understood what the downside of moving to the case facilitator model was, but is it easy to summarize what the upside of the case facilitator model would be?
The case facilitator model would, or the evaluation team model, would allow the teachers to attend to the instruction of the students without having to worry about the evaluations
Oh, I see.
and spending that time doing the evaluations.
But and you're saying that that's a trade-off that you'd prefer not to make, because at the moment they like doing the evaluations as well.
For the most part, yes.
Or they value
Yeah.
it, not like it,
Yes,
but
but
value
it's
it.
valued.
Thank you.
Board members, other questions? I think I have a question and a comment. First of all, I think the work of the committee has just been outstanding, and they really obviously took great care in coming up with the solutions, and really diligent in looking through the challenges, because we know they're significant. And I think it was pretty alarming for all of us to see the increase in the number of students. And I think where we see a 60% increase in early childhood special education, we know that it's coming through the pipeline. And so I appreciate the work on behalf of the committee. And so what I wanted to understand was, it seems when you're talking about options that it seems somewhat determined that we will need a minimum of 2 additional teachers.
Yes,
Okay.
with the early childhood special
Okay.
education, that is a need,
Okay.
at this time.
Okay, so,
meet the caseload
and
limits.
then, I really like the thought around doing the, clerical piece as, not within special ed, again, so we really are looking at that maintenance of effort pieces as significant, so I think that was, I really like seeing that. Then sort of this, what I wish would have, you know, been the driver of this review would have been the state saying, let's look at maybe where we can eliminate redundant reporting and, you know, I love that this solution helps our teachers be with students, but I wish the challenge would have been how can we decide to streamline reporting and it's always been such an onerous effort and they don't seem to wanna ever let up and it really makes it challenging. So I know what you're up against is really difficult, but I appreciate the solutions that you're working with.
There is some movement in the legislature right now for that paperwork reduction piece. We'll see where that goes. It's not necessarily in both the Senate and the House, but it is out there. And then of course, as Representative Klein, when he visited, you know, the piece with the special education funding, we keep talking about that special education is not funded to the level that was promised by the federal government, and also the state level as well is not where it needs to be, and it falls on to the school districts to make up that difference. Yes, exactly.
So Julie, I think the key piece as the board's looking at this is Cheryl is gonna be back to you, I would say, within the next several weeks to talk about the hiring of the two FTE of early childhood. Because again, as you look at it, we've gone from 40 to 99 kids in early childhood. So we've got a 60 student increase in early childhood alone out of the 80. And we've doubled the number of the neurobiological students in terms of the student population. So
Right.
you've got not only a significant increase, but you've got significant issues with the kids that we're working with that are birth through 5 years old. So that part we know is coming, and we need to be prepared for those too. And I think Cheryl will be looking at coming back to you with potentially a initial strategy on the clerical side to at least begin to think about how we might pilot that piece going forward into the next year. I appreciate it much that she is and her team are saying we want to look this over a little more. We want to make sure the information and the data that's coming out of the model are accurate. I think that's a really good piece rather than just charging in. But I also think that as we work through this process, we also need to take a look at the fact that I think what we've done, which we believe has helped us to continually be in a good place for hiring special ed staff, which is having the period 4 case management built into elementary and secondary workloads, that we are in a better position with that particular piece in place. However, I would believe that there are a number of districts across the state that do not provide that option for their staff members.
Most do not.
Most do not. And so, again, whether they offset for those that do not is that they do the teams or
Right.
they do some other kind of strategy.
Right.
But I know our folks through the years have said, you know, we want to be able to keep close track on the students that we're serving directly. That helps us to really get a feel of what's happening for them. But also at the same time, it's can I get enough minutes in to get everything I need to get done? So I really appreciate the fact that I think Cheryl and the team have said, we know we've got to get some things done now, but we also want to be careful in terms of how we take the next steps, because the full rollout of the first effort would be at least a $300,000 bump if we were to hire everybody.
From the general fund.
From the general fund.
yeah, from the
That's
general
beyond,
fund.
after the reimbursement
That's
from
above and
special
beyond
education.
what gets reimbursed from special ed.
It's
So
$500,000.
I think there's a real desire to try to take it very carefully, and I appreciate that work.
And I appreciate the work of the committee. They really took it seriously, brought back ideas, talked with their colleagues about the process, and will continue to do that, and are asking for more information after tonight and as we move forward as well. And just on a note on the early childhood piece,
Yeah.
it's always, always important if we can catch those kids early. So that the good news is that we're catching the kids early, and our child find efforts are really starting to pay off even more so. So I think that's an important investment actually in the future.
Any last questions, board members? Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we will move on to secondary music staffing. Dr. Richardson.
Okay, and I believe Joel and Greg are going to be presenting on this. This is really something we've been looking at for several years in trying to kind of take a step back and take a new look, or kind of a resetting of the structure that we currently have for the secondary music staff. I think the most important piece to remember in getting done with this is there is no change in overall FTE, but there is a recalibrating of how that FTE is spread at the middle school and the high school. So, gentlemen, and again, this is just an item for information because this is something that is done by the building principals as part of their work.
And Chris, I would just point out that perhaps you would have been better timed using your finely tuned description of these presentations for the music staffing. Thank you.
So what did I say?
It's a tough crowd here.
But I'm fine.
Thank you. Well, as Dr. Richardson
Thank you,
indicated,
thank you. I'll be here all night.
Not to belabor his point, but to point out that really for a number of years with Greg's predecessor Jeff, and then Greg now, we really looked at the music staffing model and the modifications that we've made to it as being steps toward something that just would truly make sense when measured up against other departments where we have this kind of naturally cohesive 5 classes as a full-time position with a supervision and a preparation, and that repeats itself throughout the buildings. Music is a little bit different in terms of how those FTE are structured, so it's been a little bit difficult, and as you remember a few years ago during budgetary reduction processes, and also just as we've worked with some transition and movement of staff, Greg and I and Jeff before him have tried to kind of make a little more sense of it and have a more logical, consistent system across the secondary levels. And we really feel that this change is going to do that. So as Dr. Richardson mentioned, we are not adding FTE, but what we are essentially doing is looking at some FTE that is currently in middle school band. We currently have a 1.4 middle school band position or positions, and we would spread that additional 0.4 across the middle school and high school orchestra programs, so that in the end what we would have is 6 positions, 6 full-time positions, and so then the middle school would have a choir, orchestra, and band director or educator, and the same would be at the high school. There are a number of features at play that lead us to this conclusion as being kind of the best model. One, I think it really does, it allows us, well, it acknowledges enrollment, but it also allows us to kind of manage enrollment in the future in a more logical way. And Greg and I have talked with multiple members of the music department in the secondary buildings that it's been really hard to kind of gauge, well, when do we add and when do we subtract and when do we stand pat? And I think the fact that all 3 positions are the same now, and we can begin to kind of evaluate how to adjust them in the future, in future years, as middle school band begins to grow, as high school orchestra begins to grow, as middle school choral program begins to grow. And now we have kind of a consistent way to meet those changing dynamics of those different departments, because we're starting from kind of a solid, consistent level across the board. So that's really what we wanted to share with you tonight regarding music staffing.
Board members, are there any questions? Rob?
When you talk about how it acknowledges enrollment, I'm just wondering if you've got full-time positions, they're all equal across the board, will you end up, I mean, right now, what's the middle school band enrollment, and what would be the high school orchestra enrollment? Would they be similar?
Well, they wouldn't be similar to one another necessarily, and part of that is the nature of the type of ensemble. So if you have, because the instrumentation is such that in band that you need many more instruments than violin, than orchestra, you actually need a larger number of band musicians, band instrumentalists, to pull off the sound that's necessary in a band setting. Whereas on the orchestra side, there are 4 instruments, so you could actually have a point at which there are too many of each, or the imbalance is such that it doesn't work. So where a band of, say, for example, 30 would be a real sparse band, where you'd be looking at roughly two players per instrumentation. On the orchestra side, that might be perfectly acceptable because, again, 30 divided by 4 sections is going to be fundamentally different. So in terms of that enrollment number, those aren't going to be equal per se, but they're going to be consistent with what is kind of necessary to create that ensemble piece.
But then, doesn't that mean that, say, the middle school band director would have a larger number of students, more lessons to give, and so they're really responsible for educating way more students, and so maybe that's an argument for having a higher FTE where it is right now, because they're actually teaching more students during the day, and they're having to teach, I don't know, woodwinds and percussion and brass and everything, and you've got an orchestra teacher who's teaching 4 different string instruments. So it seems like there's actually a larger workload for the band position, and especially I think in middle school, because there's always kind of attrition as you go along as people get more busy in high school. So I think the high school band is smaller than the middle school band, but wouldn't it make more sense to continue to have the FTE where there's more students and a bigger workload?
Well, pertaining to the lesson structure, really across our buildings, the music educators have kind of made individual determinations as to how best to serve those groups. So, for example, Kyle Eastman at the high school in choir has the least amount of time during his day, has a large number of students, least number of hours during his day where he can do lessons. So his lessons might take the form of a sectional where all of the tenors in a given group, or all of the males in the orchestra or in the choir program might gather. So some of that is dependent, and yes, that the nature of this division of FTE may require middle school band, for example, to structure their lessons differently than they would have with a 1.4. We think that there are also, there's individuality throughout the different departments within the music program, 612, that allow for some different types of lesson structure, but still get at the notion of that individualized instruction, or certainly small group instruction that lesson piece is meant to provide.
Board members, other questions or comments? I had one question. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, no.
Thank you. Appreciate the analysis and recommendations to strengthen the music program.
Thank you. Other comments, board members? One thing I wanted to clarify, I thought I understood that this realignment or also eliminates what we call windshield time.
It does, yes.
Yeah, and so if you maybe speak
Right,
to
you
that.
bet, because we have, Greg and I Greg and I share both of our orchestra directors. So Heather Olivier and Paul Housley actually moved back and forth between the 2 buildings. And that was out of the design that we created 2 years ago when we kind of modified the music program at that time. And so yes, this is really an opportunity to eliminate that piece and really maximize the efficiency for both of those directors.
Any last questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Good, so moving right along.
Yes. Well, that was the plan.
Yeah. So, the next item, board discipline policies and student citizen handbook. Just a reminder to board members, we had a lot of information in the table file, so we want to take a moment to make sure everybody's got the materials that were part of the table file. And then, ready, Dr. Richardson?
Okay. So again, as we promised, we want to come back tonight to basically share with you our recommended adjustments and modifications to board policy 501 and 527, as well as changes to the Student Citizenship Handbook, as well as information about the notice of expulsion and withdrawal agreement templates, as well as the abeyance agreement template, which will be new. And also the material that's in the table file, which would also be included, which are the actual revisions to those pages, a modification that gives an expellable offenses sheet that details all the different specific offenses that are expellable and at what level they become expellable as a recommended level as opposed to a possible. And then also some information that we put together for you that takes a look at the discipline process for serious offenses and the modifications to the vehicle registration information as suggested in our discussions to put in place an ability for students to see when they sign up for their parking permits to know what is allowed to happen in terms of the search of their vehicles, as well as what the violations will have as far as consequences. Joel?
And I'll draw your attention specifically, well, more so in depth at least, to the items that are in your table file that you're least familiar with. As we talked about at the board work session, that we would modify the vehicle registration form so that it better detailed some of the elements that we were talking about here in terms of parking lot searches and rights and responsibilities of students with cars in the parking lots. And so what you have before you in terms of the vehicle registration is essentially a mock-up, a draft, if you will, of what that might look like. The document, as they appear for students, is a duplicate document. So school keeps the top copy, student keeps the bottom. So our vision would be that something similar to what's listed there, that's right out of policy 527, would be a component of the piece that the students keep. So they would have that information with them, and we would draw their attention to that more thoroughly than when they're making those parking permit purchases. That's a lot of P's, parking permit purchase. The second document in your table file is just a revision of page 28, and that's the electronic page 28. So it may, if you have a hard copy, it may be a different page number. I apologize for that. But it essentially, the grid, it's a translation of the grid that you as a board and Dr. Richardson created for the work sessions in February. And with just a couple of modifications, the initial version that you had in your packet from last week listed the yeses and nos as they're described, as they're listed there. The main difference with this document is that you will see, based on the legend there below, right above the offense chart, the P, the R, the M, and the H. The P and the R basically delineate when the expulsion proceeding is a recommendation. In other words, that the policy tells us that we're bringing that recommendation to you. The P stands for possible, so that is essentially a decision made at the administrative level in consultation with the superintendent. And so that may or may not be brought to the board for expulsionary proceedings. So that's the delineation between the P and the R. And then the H and the M only apply to the direct and indirect threat line, and that's just in reference to the fact that the middle school and the high school have a different response at the first and second offense level. So it separates the two secondary buildings in terms of that response. Everything else you have at this point is listed on the memo that accompanied the information. The key pieces that I will highlight, and then I'll allow you to formulate the questions that you need answered, was regarding board policy 501. That's where we were specific with an updated definition of firearm, and also clarifying possession, including items in a parked vehicle in the parking lot. And then also, if you remember, that the policy, the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act, and our Citizenship Handbook were kind of a circular discussion of what definition is being used for firearm. And so we've clarified that, where we've removed the language that points to U.S. code. And so now our document is consistent, pointing at that definition that was created at those board work sessions. Regarding policy 527, and these are also then again, a number of these items that are repeated on the back of the parking permit form. But that's the addition of the language that talks about the purpose and procedure for the dog searches that we conduct, and then a simple change of numbering of those bulleted items in that document. Regarding the Citizenship Handbook, change 3 on the memo to the board, is an adjustment again of the definition for firearms within the confines of the Citizenship Handbook, which is just a replay of policy 501. And then an explanation of, the addition of the withdrawal and abeyance piece in the appendix of the Citizenship Handbook, which is then followed immediately by this grid of expellable offenses that I've modified for you in your table file. The final 3 documents are those 3 documents that essentially represent the choices if our intent is to move down the path of expulsion, and that would be the abeyance agreement, the withdrawal agreement, and then of course the notice of expulsion. And all 3 are similar documents, obviously. In the abeyance piece, the key language differential there is that we essentially take the role of transferring that student to the ALC, whereas the determination of a next school in the withdrawal agreement is really up to the family and to the student who's withdrawing at that time. With that, I will open it up for your questions and comments.
I would just mention, Julie, that the other adjustment that is in your table file to policy 501 actually came from Noel, who I think was reading in detail the language around 501 as far as the definition of firearm, and suggested to us, and I think reasonably so, that we would stop the initial definition statement after the word air, which matches exactly the MNSCU and University of Minnesota language, and then to separate but also describe a firearm as herein defined may cause serious injury or death. And again, that was the language that actually was taken off several weapons that we reviewed to identify it, and it helps to separate the fact that there would be some things that might be fired through a pump of air or whatever that are things like Nerf balls or Nerf guns or whatever, which while not fun are not going to really hurt anyone. So we're just trying to be really clear in how we articulate that concept.
And Chris, I apologize if I'm repeating what you led in with, but again, just so the board is aware.
Since I messed the other thing up, go right ahead.
No, that's quite all right. Just so the board is reminded that as staff liaison to the District Youth Council, this is essentially where your review and blessing would be to take these documents then to the District Youth Council for their review of language of these documents. One of the things obviously we've talked about the importance of is that students have an understanding of really what the documents say, what they mean, how the school responds as a result of those documents, and I would say, and this is my own personal opinion, most importantly, it establishes the beginning of the conversation that leads us to a point where students are able to explain to us what makes the most sense in terms of getting that message out, and making sure that students have the rules and regulations and their responsibilities and rights available to them, if certainly not by memory, that they're available to them in a place that makes sense to them, so that they're not coming at it from a perspective of saying that they don't know if certain policies or procedures exist. So that's where I think the student piece becomes really important.
And again, I think to frame what we talked about to begin with, the purpose of this at the end of this session today is simply if you agree with us in concept as to the modifications that have been made, what we want to do is make sure that we have the time to share this with the District Youth Council to get their ideas and feedback before we bring this back to you for final approval. So there's none of these changes. If you tell us yes, in concept that we like what's here, we'd like you to tweak this or that or whatever, but if we can get some direction from you to go ahead and carry this forward to the Youth Council, that gives us then the time from now through the end of May to get their feedback and modifications, and then we would be coming back to you in June for the actual approval, which is the same time we would normally approve on an annual basis all of the discipline code and all of the handbooks and all the other things that are going on. So timing-wise, this will get us where we need to go, and with your help in terms of where we are at this point.
Good, thank you. So, board members, I will open it up for questions, comments, clarification.
I was just wondering, with the policy 527, under the definitions, whether dog search should be included under reasonable suspicion as what explicitly there, since that's one of the major ones that people ask about. So, you know, it has reasonable suspicion maybe based on the school official's personal observation, et cetera, just having the result of a dog search or something like that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Can I ask what point where was
This
it?
is,
I just wanna be sure. I-
527, 3 under definitions, B is reasonable suspicion.
Or you're just saying that would be added to?
Yeah, just add-
Maybe based on
That,
this.
that's one of the
this
things
or
that reasonable
canine search.
suspicion would be based on, would be
Spell it right out.
dog search.
So it's really clear
Yeah.
to an
So
individual.
they can't, I mean, that's on the next, added on the next page, it would just make it clear.
Because it's really spelled out in 5.
Yeah.
But what we're hearing is you'd like to make it really clear that that also includes the fact that you have a canine that's hitting on a vehicle. Yeah.
All right, I got that noted, Chris.
That's something that we surely would be able to do.
Mhm.
Margaret.
On a couple of comments, it's going to come as no surprise to anybody. I had one thing when I was reading through this, I got confused about adults who are permitted. The language didn't seem clear to me about when would an adult who has a permit to have a firearm be allowed to have that firearm on school grounds. It was confusing to me.
Are we still on the same policy?
Yeah.
Well, first I'm looking at policy 501, section heading 4, expectations, under B, 3. Persons who are authorized to keep or store in a motor vehicle pistols in accordance with the statute or other firearms, that these are exceptions to the rule when adults can't have firearms on the property. That one, and I'm thinking, if this section truly says that antique firearms that are carried or possessed as curiosities are exempted, if the law states that and we can't overcome it, so be it, but I'm thinking those can create just as much harm as a present day weapon. And also I'm confused about who can carry, because then on the next page, under 6, consequences, A1, it says any employee, including one authorized by permit to carry a firearm, would be, you know, basically in trouble and for having that firearm in their weapon. But over here we have, or that weapon in a car, over here we have some exemptions.
So there's really 3 different levels.
Right.
Obviously, this policy addresses students.
Mhm.
Students have the most restrictions
Right.
in terms of how they can address this.
Mhm.
Employees have the second most restricted position because we basically can say to employees, you are our employee, you're on our grounds,
Mhm.
you follow our rules.
Mhm.
As far as the other piece, which is everything that you see there under B is right out of the statutes.
Yeah.
The only folks that can carry a weapon onto school grounds and walk into a building, et cetera,
Mhm.
right now would be a police officer. That's and that's the
Number
only.
1 here.
Yeah, it's number 1.
Okay.
What has been framed out for other individuals who have legitimate conceal and carry permits, those individuals have a right to do one thing. They can have the concealed weapon on themselves as they're sitting in the car or driving into your lot in the car. But once they go to get out of the car, the only place they can go is to the trunk, open the trunk of the vehicle, lock the weapon in the trunk of the vehicle,
Mhm.
and they cannot go inside. I've had at least 2 individuals in the last 10 years who have challenged that and said, no, you know, I want to be able to, I have a conceal and carry weapon permit. I want to carry my gun into the school. And I have said to both of those individuals, there is no way that I'm going to allow that to happen.
Okay.
And they, while they've not been happy necessarily with that, they have abided by that my sharing of that kind of line in the sand. So really, in terms of anyone who's not an employee and not a student can only bring it onto school grounds if they have a conceal and carry permit, and then only if they are in their car or they come directly out of their car and lock it in the trunk. So if somebody's out walking around the parking lot, then we would call the police. If anything, because that, we have every right to have people not have weapons, any individual with weapons. So that applies to, obviously, the school buildings, school grounds, parking lots. The only gray place that I am aware of right now, and we've tried to frame it in our document, but I am not sure exactly how it would get played out, although I think because the city has the same regs as we do, would be if someone, as you, I think as you'd ask, would be if they were at the soccer fields, which is not our property, which is the city's property. And so if they were on the city's property, at that point, where I think we could ask them to leave, we would probably have to call the police to have them come off the property, because the police would have to say, our parks ban guns.
Right. Well, and it does say under definitions, 501.
Right.
Definitions C, the school locations include any wherever school activities are
Exactly.
happening.
Exactly. And that works out great in most cases, because where school activities are gonna happen, typically are gonna be on our property or another school district's property, and all of us have the same regs. But the unique pieces is the only unique piece I can think of in Northfield where you're getting off of school grounds would be the soccer fields, because those are not owned by the school district.
Right.
That would be the only place, and that we'd have to depend on the city and city police to, and we would, if I think if we had someone come on to the soccer grounds while our kids were there, I think our staff would call the police and have the police come and escort the person off.
Because
But-
by our
but with-
definition, it's
yeah.
the school property while we're on it.
Right, that's right.
And the city you'd have to hope that they would uphold that.
We would expect the city
Okay.
to uphold that.
My other question was, I would like to see some verbiage in here about stacking. We talk a lot about that. And I think the kids deserve to be aware that it could happen. And my other question was, on this draft, this is great. I'd like to see in addition, in the front, like right in the front where the kids are signing, and it could be fit in there saying, I understand my responsibilities in accordance with everything in the back of this. So that signature
5.7.
isn't just about saying, here's my money and I understand the parking lot vehicle policy. It's saying I'm signing to the fact that I've read and understood everything on the back as well.
Sure.
I'd like to see that, because I can see them saying I never saw the back.
Yep, no, we can take care of that.
Joel, the other thing you might want to share is, because we actually had a discussion on the stacking piece today,
We did, and
you might want to kind of frame your thoughts there.
Sure,
for
and we
Margaret
as
and others.
secondary administration have talked at length about this, and part of the reason that we don't have any draft language for the stackable piece is that there are, the nature of what we do and how we do it, there are some times when, I'm trying to think of hypothetical situations, but I guess maybe I'll try to generalize, and hopefully that'll get us somewhere near the target. That, stacking is, the problem with stacking language is that it essentially indicates that we will respond by not stacking or stacking no matter what. And the difficulty of that is that there are circumstances where it's in the best interest of the students and the school not to. And there are circumstances when it's in the best interest of the students and the school to do so.
Because I know you shared an example for me today of a situation where you chose not to stack.
Right. So, a hypothetical example where a student were to bring a non-firearm weapon to school, that's going to be a fairly significant, sorry, my words are leaving me, suspension. In that particular case, so a non-firearm weapon, Dr. Richard and I are going to engage in a conversation about, all of the kind of the surroundings of that case, threat potential, the student we're talking about, previous in things they've been involved with. And so in this hypothetical example, we decide that a suspension is sufficient, that the student will return to school after a certain number of days. When Chris and I have that conversation, I'm already committing to a lengthy suspension. But if it happens that in the search for that student's, searching in the student's bag, that we find that weapon, but we also find an e-cigarette, or something else that would maybe be a day or two on its own. In that situation, it doesn't really serve us to say we're going to stack those two, and instead of 7 days do 9, or instead of 8 days do 10. And so those are circumstances where, depending on the nature of how things are found, what is found, what the offense is, there's the potential for that to kind of to tie us up a little bit. And I don't know how to articulate language that kind of says it depends without it sounding like we're going to treat people unequally. But I can tell you, and I think I can speak safely for Greg and Michael at the middle school, and Jeff and Marnie at the high school too, that those types of decisions are made with the best interest of the students and the school in mind. And when I say students, I mean the individual, but I also mean the general population of our school too. So all of those things kind of come into play for that decision making. So we're fully prepared to draft that language if that's the board's interest in having something that is that specific. But I would tell you that based on our conversations that we've had, it does have the potential to put us in situations where like in that hypothetical example, it's really not in the best interest of that student to be out for additional days simply because the policy reads that we're stacking those or that we're not stacking those, if that makes some sense. But again,
and I think it is kind of we heard a lot during the discussion about this earlier about taking things on a case-by-case basis, and I think in that situation, that's exactly what administrators are doing, is saying, in this situation, this is the really substantive violation. This other violation is kind of on the side. The flip side, I think, is you could have multiple violations where what the demonstration is a demonstration of complete disregard for school rules. So you have multiple violations of a significant nature, but in different areas. And in that setting, my sense is that a stacking approach is probably exactly the right thing to do. But what I think Joel was saying and Greg is saying is trying to think about how do you lay that out in a way, because my sense is this is the part of our discipline process where I hope as a board that you are prepared to say, I trust the administrators to do what's right for kids. Because I think if we try to write it in a way that is totally black and white, then I think the situation we end up with is we either overkill or we significantly under punish students who may need additional punishment because of that kind of wanton disregard. That's a tough piece, and that's a piece where you're hiring these folks to be people who have good judgment and really know how to work with students and identify what's the right level. And at the same time, we have to show the right kind of consistency so that kids are not saying, well, you treated me totally differently or unfairly in comparison to somebody else. That is probably one of the most difficult things that administrators have to do. But I think you pay these folks every day to make those kinds of decisions.
Ellen, follow up to
Sure.
Mark. I have a question, a totally different question, but I wanted to follow up since we're on this topic.
All right, good.
The one thing I guess that would concern me is just if we could maybe, if we can't address that in the handbook, but we use the same, we have this first, second, third offense, the same language in the parking permit, which I think is different, that maybe we can call the parking permit, it's the first time, or, I mean, then I think it's confusing if we're using the exact same language in both cases and we're not actually meaning the same thing. Because I think the parking permit really is unless I'm wrong here, and the parking permit is the same sort of, I just wanted to understand, because I'm still having a hard time, like, with wanting to make sure that I'm understanding the language. So on the parking permit, when you say a first offense, second offense, third offense, is that the first time you do this? versus you would stack that as well? I mean, and I'm just trying to understand all, how this is used.
Okay, so I want to be clear that you're looking on the first page where it says vehicle policy and it's permitted vehicles, first offense and so on. That's a situation where, we have spots that, I think we would, what I can tell you we will do in the final product of this would be to separate this is language about appropriate parking. So if you're parking in the handicap zone, if you're parking in areas that are yellow lined, if you're parking in front of the road sign instead of a specific spot, these are the types of, this is the response that our office has. So your car is there's a violation warning the first time, and that progresses. Right.
Time versus first offense, like this language, first offense is different than time, whereas this is time, is that right?
And maybe it should be like first violation
Am I-
in the code of conduct, but these
I don't
could
want it to be
offenses.
nitty, I
Yeah.
just think that if the language were meaning something a little bit different. this is
So
handbook
the idea
plan.
may be changing this language so
Yeah.
it's clearly different than first offense, second offense, third
Oh, I
offense
see what you're saying.
in
Yeah.
the citizenship handbook.
Sure.
I would
So
say
you-
just violation.
Yeah.
So if these are called about as violations because we said written parking violation warning, we use violation, we have the same language.
Because that
across
doesn't
the
Yeah,
box
that's fine.
in the administration.
Yeah, that's an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
You bet, I understand.
Is that, I think that's very, very doable.
On
And
that-
it helps to separate
Yeah.
Yeah.
the concept between this and, what we have for other things.
And to go on top of that, then if a dog hits on my car, I'm a student, and the drug dog hits on my car, and you find marijuana in my car, but I'm also parked in a handicap stall, which is clearly a violation, are those two violations? Or is parking completely different?
Well, I guess I would see it as completely different. We have a parking lot attendant who's there on a regular daily basis. So, a student who's parked in the handicap zone is going to be seen at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
So that's going to be something that is
Or
done
without a
quickly.
permit, or?
Right, and those checks are made, and so I will tell you that if we're, our parking supervisor is going to be in the process of the dog search. So we're not gonna, if a dog is hit in a car and that's what we have found in the car, that's gonna be our main focus.
Right.
We're not going to be heading back and saying, and we're gonna give them a parking violation. In that particular case, it doesn't make sense to, and the fact of the matter is that the parking violation is specific to their ability to park in the parking lot, or it's also a warning to say don't do it again. This structure is fairly tame in terms of kind of how our responses typically are for these more egregious offenses.
Okay. And how often do they lose their parking? How often does that generally happen in a school year?
It's not very frequent, and as you see that the third offense of a permitted vehicle is that, the potential of being towed. And we've, gone that direction at times, but we towed 2 or 3 cars, and that message is pretty clear for the next number of months. So it's really not we don't have a lot of missteps in the parking lot.
Board members, other questions? Fritz?
I have another possible change request, and I apologize if this is in here and I have overlooked it a couple of times. And also, I acknowledge that what I'm proposing is possibly overly verbose. Regarding the notice of expulsion template, the withdrawal agreement template, and the abeyance agreement template.
Okay. Is this something for all 3 of them?
Potentially for all 3 of them.
Okay.
I'm guessing that if I am a parent and I get one of those letters, the thing that I'm going to be, the collection of things that I'm going to be most worried about are, is the ALC still an option? How does that work? What happens about graduation, both about diplomas and about marching, and that's it. So if there were explicit language that said, if you choose to withdraw, that doesn't mean that you're closing the door to the ALC, but it means that it might, if the language were explicit, if you get expelled, you may still have the option to go to the ALC, give or take whatever civil or criminal penalties are happening to you at the same time. if that's the case. So I would probably make all three of those explicitly say what happens about the ALC and what the consequences on graduation and marching are.
Got it.
Because the one thing that I think we could guarantee on the ALC transfer in the advance is at the end of the year, if they were ready to graduate, they could either graduate from the ALC or from the high school, which I think could be a real positive piece for people choosing that advance piece instead of the other. And so we just need to make that really clear that that's the case.
Yeah, because that conflicts with me not attend or participate in any activities, which is in the new trespass.
Right, and that's a situation where, you know, we've had situations where trespass notices are in place and we, you know, make exceptions. You know, a student who's got a trespass notice but his sister or sibling plays basketball. So we'll make allowances of that type, so that would fit into that category.
Jeff?
You know, I'd also add, and Fritz, I think if you're a parent, the number one thing I think you're gonna be considered about is possible criminal charges. So if there's a priority, that would be the priority.
Yes,
It's just a
absolutely.
matter, state and federal, and then yes, how is the school district gonna handle it?
Oh.
So I have one comment and then I had a question. So the minor one is in the letter, we use mail language, and I think typically now in most cases, you're trying not to be neutral in the mail.
And I'm sorry, Ellen, where are we?
Sorry, the letter to address the parents use the student is always referred to as mail. I mean, that's really a nit, but I just would like us to.
In the expulsion notice?
In the letter that goes, notice of proposed expulsion to parents, it's, refers to the student as his parents. He had notice, his expulsion hearing. I'm just asking if
So
we can
you
use that.
go right to the bottom,
Yep.
first
Be
page.
more
you'll catch
neutral
it.
about.
Gender neutral.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, that these notices are all the templates that we work from, so we go through and make all of those changes as we're going. Noted.
So that does get cleaned up when they do it. But this is the draft that the attorneys provided for, saying this meets all the appropriate statutory language, but.
Even legal language is not.
But, his or her is just simply a fix we have to make before we send it out. And it's probably better to leave it that way, because it's a lot easier to run through the template and say, find his and replace it with her. Than it is to do a his/her and then have to try to take one piece out.
Or we could tip it and make them all her and change them to him when necessary, so could do that too.
Well, I think if you put the his and her in, you can, the find and replace would work the exact same way. If you have in the template, if you have him, her, his, her, you just search for him/her, put whatever one in you want. So I think the template, it makes sense to have both genders appropriately labeled.
We can do that.
Okay,
Yeah, no
and then
problem.
my question was, you had given there's the table file, the roadmap sort of piece.
Yes, and
I had a question because of Dr. Richards and I had gotten an example from Hudson, and with the abeyance, and I guess that was what my concern was of, how I understood it happening.
yeah,
was-
it's very different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so the
it's very
abeyance had the board actually being able to have it, and I thought what I liked about Hudson's is it kind of protected administration, it put the trust in administration, but that the board is still, by law, is ultimately the one who has to, be at the end game. So what the Hudson one talks about is if they chose abeyance, the board was provided a recording of pre-expulsion conference with the ID data redacted. I would just to see that wouldn't, I don't know that they actually ever provided or if it's just there, but the board agrees with the administration's alternative in lieu of expulsion. Because then the administration there's no question about coercion, like we're putting the trust in the administration, we know that they're not doing that, but we're providing this sort of extra layer because we're saying, no, we're aware that you chose this and that we offered the abeyance and that this was. So I guess that when I looked at the Hudson thing, I thought it was good for administration to have that layer because it provided sort of the cover that, no, the board is completely on top of abeyance and we agree by having, and where I looked here, it doesn't, and maybe there's just not the detail in it.
Well, I think philosophically, this probably comes from a different place than this does.
Okay.
Because I think this one it talks about if they're referred to the board, you know, it goes directly from referred to the board for expulsion, and board conducts the expulsion hearing, and board does the decision. The other is student is not referred for expulsion, but the board still has the record, the board still has to agree with the alternatives. And so that means every time you have any other disciplinary action that takes place that is not an expulsion, it is saying the board is going to get a record of that conference, and the board is going to agree with the administration. I looked at that and said, that in my humble opinion, is a nightmare. And again, I think it just comes back to the fact that in the situations where we're not moving toward expulsion, we're going to do something that's either suspension or a lesser disciplinary action. That in those cases, you have an administrative team that is prepared to do those, does those all the time, and that's where all what you heard about at 2 different work sessions, and talking about how they kind of swoop that kid up and work with that kid and think about how to make that happen. But the idea of you getting all of the documentation that says, because it says you provided a record of the expulsion conference, and we'd have to redact the data out of it because you couldn't see the kid's name, and then you would have to in some way have an opportunity to say, yes, to each one of these pieces, I agree with this non-expulsion action, and then that has to be part of the record too. And I just looked at it and said, realistically, I think I would like to suggest that it makes more sense for administrators to handle any of those pieces that are non-expulsion, that your activity is really limited to those times when the decision is made not to do an abeyance, is not to do a withdrawal, but is looking at some kind of decision to go forward with an expulsion hearing. And at that place, then you have a hearing officer, you have data from the hearing officer, you have all the other pieces that go with that. So, I mean, obviously this is a direction that you may want us to look at. It would not be a direction I would ever encourage a board to get into, simply because I think you are opening the door up to have to look at a lot of other data that you currently don't look at and that you currently expect administrators to handle on their own. So that's why it's very different. This one is very different than this one, but what I wanted to do here is to reflect what I see our process as being, which is really the driver here is if you have something that's an expellable offense, then before you go any farther, again, you're going to check to find out if the student is in special education and deal with that issue. But if they're not, then you are sitting down with the parent and saying, here are 3 different directions you can go. You can tell us what your choice is there, and then we'll move forward with the process depending on what you tell us your choice is. And that really, in terms of it just seems the way this is written in a way, the Hudson version is written in a way that expulsion alternatives mean any other thing other than expulsion. So it could be the student got a 5-day suspension. The student got it.
Well, the rest of the packaging.
I know, but this in itself feels that way. So I was trying to avoid getting into that. That is sure something we can look at if the board as a whole wants to go that direction. But I would not encourage it, but I think you can tell us, because obviously we've spent a lot of time on thinking about this, and if there's a desire to do this differently, we would sure look at that.
I appreciate the flow chart, the roadmap. I suggested that earlier, and I got a very, I feel like there's a very audible silence when I say this. But it points out not only the next step in the sequence, but it also clearly articulates the complexity of the issue. And it puts it all in, may not include everything that's on this page, but I expect it does. But it points out, anybody reading it, what the administration
So student and parent can choose expulsion, abeyance, or withdrawal? I thought the option of abeyance was sort of a administrative decision, like whether they'd offer that student an expulsion, like a soft red instead of a red card.
Well, yeah, I mean, it really is in the hands of the parents and the students, because the students have a statutory right to the ELC experience.
Okay.
So if I am, I'll just put myself in the hypothetical, if I'm that student that is set to be expelled, and I opt for the abeyance, essentially what the school is doing is then just automatically transferring my enrollment status to the ELC.
Okay, yeah.
If I decide to, and I think this is a little bit what, Fritz, you were speaking to, if I decide to withdraw, fill out the withdrawal agreement on a Thursday, and Friday morning I wake up and say, wait a minute, I wanna go to the ELC, I can do that, I haven't waived that statutory right. So when we say the choice of expulsion, I mean, the proceedings of expulsion is what the school district does. If the student decides to allow that to go forward, I mean, it's still that they're not really making that decision as much as they're letting that happen.
Right.
The other two pieces are more where, decisions are being made to say, do I want to withdraw from the school, stop the expulsion proceedings, and enroll in a school of my choice? Or do I want to withdraw from the school, stop the expulsionary proceedings, and immediately be enrolled into the ALC? And that's really where the key difference between the abeyance and the withdrawal agreement are. It puts the onus of enrollment in the next school on a different person. One is on the school, one is on the individual.
But isn't there, well, what we're talking, isn't there a point where the student really, we don't want them even at the ALC?
We don't have
Depending on
that.
the
We don't have
crime.
that option.
We don't have a choice.
Because of the
State law.
statute.
The statute
Okay.
basically says, and unfortunately it is even if we have criminal behavior on the part of the student, the only time that we could deny a student would be if we had a situation of sexual assault or rape, and the individual who had been raped or sexually assaulted was at the ALC. Then we could say, no, I'm sorry, we're not able to make that happen. But for anything else, the ALC is an option, because that's the way the state statute is written, because they actually list 10 reasons for why you can be enrolled in an ALC, and one of them can include the fact that you had some kind of criminal charges and are looking for a different place to be.
And then just my other comment was,
Sure.
I'm thrilled to hear under this no trespassing area, that on a case-by-case basis, you can make some exceptions for kids to keep that family cohesiveness together, their support networks together. I'm thrilled to see that this no trespassing clause doesn't have to be a hard and fast rule. I think that's amazing.
And without,
thank you.
You bet, and without betting too much money, without looking, I believe our trespass notice has language that says, essentially if you're looking to.
It says exactly that,
Yeah.
that the building administrator is able to give permission for the student to come onto school
Yeah.
property for specific
That's wonderful.
purposes. But it also avoids the flip side, which is kid just comes on for any reason. That can't happen. But if there would be, my sister's gonna be in a play or in a music concert and I wanna come with my family, obviously on a case-by-case and a situation-by-situation basis, we'll allow that to happen, as well as the graduation piece at the end of the year.
Thank you. Rob?
I just had a question about, in both the withdrawal agreement and the abeyance agreement, there's the future discipline clause, and it makes complete sense in the withdrawal agreement, because it's saying if you come back, we can still, your record is still here, and we're not limited in disciplining you. But for the abeyance, they're still in the district, so the district's right to discipline them is never interrupted at all. So that seems a little bit redundant to have the same language for the future discipline.
Yeah, that one, we may actually want to, check out with,
Sure.
with Mick in terms of that piece. But my initial gut level would be, we want to be in a position where if they take the abeyance and move to the ALC and then do something else that would get them expelled from the ALC, we don't want them back in the high school, nor do we want them in the ALC particular location. And we have dealt with some kids who were expelled from their own school district, expelled from their ALC, and have come to our district as the third choice down the
High
road.
school
So
or to our ALC?
that were in another high school, were in that high school or that school district's ALC program, and then were expelled from that ALC program. They couldn't go back to their own high school. They couldn't go back to their ALC, but they could come to us as another ALC, and again, we need to accept them. So, and again, this is all really tied to the statutory piece that is really looking at the idea that they want to do everything possible not to have the student not be in school. They want to make sure that everything they can do to help the students stay in school, they're going to do.
So on the abeyance, it seems like, I'm wondering, and maybe this is just me looking up language, well, typically the abeyance is that the district is holding the expulsion in abeyance. And in this case, we're not really holding the expulsion in abeyance. Instead, we have a facility that, because it's an alternative learning center, accepts students who have different circumstances. Is that really the case, that it's not really that we would never be saying that we're holding the expulsion in abeyance as much? It's just that we have, like, if we didn't have the ALC, we wouldn't.
Or if the ALC was attached to our high school.
Right.
That's the other piece, is that if the ALC was attached to our high school, then that portion would not be applicable, so I understand where you're coming from.
So, again, my sense with this is, I'm not sure that I can see this as being a major issue. We could sure,
Well, I think
I mean, we could sure look at the language.
Having that piece up front is what
It-
this
because,
means is.
yeah, because there
blah,
would be,
blah.
you're right, there would be the point though, that if a student did something that put them at such risk that they were expelled from the ALC, we're not only saying, you've now worn out your welcome at the ALC, but you've also continued to wear out your welcome at your high school, so now you are into, I've gotta go somewhere else. You know, I don't have a choice, cause I can't bounce back to the high school at that point, because that expulsion is an abeyance. The expulsion from the high school is an abeyance while you're enrolled in the ALC. I think that's, to me, that's the kind of the underlying piece is, the abeyance is it's your enrollment at the high school, and the expulsion from the high school is an abeyance while you're at the ALC. If you should get expelled from the ALC, you can't turn around and then go back to the high school, because the minute you would, then we would do expulsion proceedings for the high school then. And because we're not gonna take that person back at that point. We've given them two chances.
I think Fritz's language would help
Yeah.
sort that out.
Okay.
Other board members have comments, questions? Jeff?
Just a question on, how many ALCs can you get kicked out of before you can't go to another ALC?
I don't believe there is an end. As long as they can continue to find one that will, and again, as a school district with an ALC in it, we have to take any student regardless
Into the ALC.
into the ALC. And if we didn't do that, then we couldn't run an ALC anymore. And not running an ALC eliminates an option for kids that need that. It also significantly reduces our funding, because at that point, any funding that we have that is for targeted services goes away. The only reason we have targeted services funding is that we run an ALC in our district. So there are several things that would be disincentives to not running an ALC anymore. For a while, however, if you think about it, in this area, we were kind of the only ALC in town. Farmington had dropped theirs, Fairville had dropped theirs, whatever. We're now starting to see a number of those ALCs coming back to life. Yeah, but for a while, they dropped theirs, and we were getting kids from all over the area. Okay.
Okay, so board members, any questions or comments?
So the question I have for you with the tweaks that we've been asked to work on tonight, are you comfortable with us taking these materials forward to the district youth council to have them review and help us with clarity of language and understanding, and also to think about what is the strategy for making sure that students are aware of these pieces? Because that's really the other part that we really want to try to do with this, is not only to think about language adjustments or modifications, but also to say, if we're going to make sure that kids know about this before they find out the hard way, what is the way that we're going to share that information with them that will not have a kid saying to us, well, I didn't know that this is what could happen to me. So if you're comfortable with that, we'd like to move that forward.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And again, because there's not a final decision, you are not making a final decision until we bring you back the modified version.
I'm sorry, I have one more.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. I'm sorry. It said in here, we talked during our work sessions that if a student said, I'm on policy 527, section 5, patrols, inspections, and searches, under B, we had talked that if you took a student out to their car and they said, well, I'm not gonna unlock the car and let you search until my mom or dad or guardian gets here, that the kids are saying, well, we found out we're immediately in trouble if we say no, and the administration said, no, they can wait for their parent. I think maybe we should state that in that last sentence. A student must unlock a locked motor vehicle or its compartments upon request. Failure to do so is a violation of this policy. So in a way, the kids are right, but could it be added that the student has the right to wait until a parent or guardian can be present? Because there was some confusion with the kids about whether or not they could say no.
Remember that discussion?
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that something?
Okay, just so I'm clear, we're on
Okay.
5B, last sentence, right?
Yeah, under 527, section 5, patrols, inspections, and searches,
Okay.
B, the last sentence. That they're gonna have to unlock it, but they can wait until their parent or guardian gets there. So they don't have the right to waive unlocking it.
To not unlock it, but they have a right to say, I'd like my parent or guardian
Right.
to be here while the
Right.
vehicle's being unlocked.
Right.
And, you know, my only sense would be if there was some kind of reasonableness in that process. So we have a search at 2:45 and they contact the parent says, well, I won't be home till 6.
Right.
And the dogs are there and everybody else is there. At that point, are we really going to sit on it for 3 hours?
Well, that would be my concern if we can't
Yeah.
reach a parent.
Right. But we had talked that the kids were saying, well, if we don't unlock the car, it's an immediate violation. And then our work sessions, there was some sense of, no, they can wait for their parents to get there. It's not an immediate violation. But according to this, it is. So we should be clear with the kids about whether or not it is.
That's something we do some thinking about. As I said, I don't want to get to the point of saying
Yeah.
this becomes the cop-out for
Yeah.
nobody ever unlocking their car.
Because your parents on a business trip.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm
back
sorry,
to
my
mom.
parents are in the Bahamas.
Right.
Or also a situation,
Back in 3
and
weeks.
this, this hasn't happened in the time I've been here, but if we have 8 cars in the parking lot, and now we're waiting for 8 sets of parents,
Mhm.
I think that's something we need to tread carefully into.
Right, but so that if they do need to unlock it right away, they should know that yes, you have to unlock it right away.
Jeff?
I'm all for protecting people's civil liberties, but the fact of the matter is, if it's a criminal offense, it's a criminal offense, and if the police are there, they can conduct themselves within whatever their due process is, period.
Yeah, but the kids should just be aware of that.
We can make them aware.
I just wanted to thank you for pulling all of this
Mhm,
together. We had
absolutely.
2 really long work sessions.
Joel and Greg have done a great job with this in terms of pulling all these pieces together. And the only thing that I did this afternoon is I did your flow chart for you because
So Noel, thank
you
you.
you said I
Compliment.
really would like one, and we made Noel's adjustments to the firearms piece, which I really think are improvements because it keeps the definition piece really tight and clean and stops after the description. And the only reason we wanted the other piece in was as a separate sentence, is just to make it clear that we're not, you know, if the kid's got the rubber suction dart gun, or he's got a, you know, a Nerf pistol or shotgun or whatever, that's not considered something that we're going to be expelling them from school.
And that could be, depending on what it looks like, it could be a lookalike or something
Yeah,
else.
the other issue may be it ends up being a weapon, because what we're running into in many cases is those kinds of, but that wouldn't be treated as a firearm, so it would be treated as a weapon. Unfortunately, that's the piece I've seen a couple different times. I've had, when I was in Osseo, we had the Brooklyn Park police chief bring in several weapons, set them down on the table, and ask board members which of these are real and which of these are not. They picked all the wrong things. Everything they picked as being fake was real, and everything they picked as being real was fake. And he said the problem is, if I'm a police officer and I'm staring down the barrel of one of these and I don't know, I'm going to shoot the person. So, you know, we don't want kids to have those anywhere near other kids or a school or anywhere for that matter.
No.
I'm even afraid to bring this up, but there's a manufacturer up in halfway between here and St. Cloud has designed a gun that looks like a cell phone.
Yeah, just saw that.
And I don't believe that's in policy.
Well, but it is, because if
But
it's,
it is.
if it's a firearm and it shoots a projectile, what, doesn't make any difference what it looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the definition is broad. Thanks a lot, Joel, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I would just like to echo, Ellen's comments. So appreciate the work of all the administrators for the time at the work sessions, and I really want to thank board members. Clearly I think we all recognize this as some of the most significant work we do as a board, and for everyone to have taken the time and understand the serious nature of what we're doing, and then multiple sets of eyes to review and to really flesh this out. I'm very grateful to all of you for the work, so thank you. Okay. All right, so we will move forward now with the potential addition of positive behavior support staffing. Oh, no. Yes, we are. We're moving forward with positive addition of the positive behavior support staffing.
There we go.
There it is.
And
Appearing before us for the first time is Michael O'Keefe from the middle school. And is Dave here? Dave
Yep.
Kraft from Greenville.
Dave's behind the screen.
I didn't see you, Dave, so I wasn't.
There he is.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay.
We have it, oh, good.
Yeah, and you're ready to go. So, what Dave and Michael want to share with us tonight is something we actually been brainstorming in cabinet over the last couple of months, and really is tied to what I think administrators overall and staff overall in the last year or so have really shared concerns about, and that is what has been seen as kind of the spike in terms of social, emotional situations that are occurring, mental health issues that are occurring at school, and the impact it has not only on the student that is struggling with those issues, but also on the staff and other students in the building. And so as we talked about options and ways to address this, elementary principals and also Michael, because of his experience in Rosemont Alpha Valley with a similar position a couple of years ago, have sat down and kind of put together what they'd like to do is kind of the first 30,000-foot perspective for you. And what we really want to do from this is to hear from you how you feel about, obviously there's no detail in here about how many people we're going to hire, what those people look like. It's more why we need it and what kind of a person or individual we might look for. But we would be, if your response is positive, then we would be looking at coming back to you with a more focused presentation that would really talk about what this would look like, because I think there's a real interest on the part of administrators and staff in trying to address this. So, gentlemen.
Well, thank you. This is a great opportunity. So as Dr. Richardson said, this is a satellite view right above the earth in terms of what our needs are. So there's nothing really all too finished and specific. But the question really asked here is why is there a need for a PALS position in the elementary schools? And as Dr. Richardson said, there's kind of a rising dynamic, a different dynamic in our schools right now. We feel that a PALS position or a positive attention and learning support specialist would help us to build a common language of culture and respect within our school community. And really what this person would do is support the positive behavior intervention support model, which is it's a multi-tiered model, just like RTI is for academics, but it's for behavior. And so when we talk a little bit about build a common language and culture of respect within our school, this person would work with over the whole school in terms of building that language that we're going to use together, and then reinforcing and developing even that culture of respect within our school community, kind of a tier 1 or primary tier level. This position would support the increase of students with mental health needs. I just want to be real specific about that too. Typically we're talking about behavior needs. And the truth is that, well, first of all, that kind of conjures up this, smoking in the boys' room or fighting at the hockey rink after school and those kinds of things. And that's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is somebody who is able to help students who have social or emotional needs that wind up in a behavioral manifestation most of the time. And that's not fighting. I mean, it could be a child who's just simply, a kindergarten child who's depressed and stuck and can't get up. And this is a kid who needs some additional, support. Model self-advocacy skills for our students. Teach the self-regulation skills to children that a large number of our students need. Encourage self-efficacy in a child. And this is kind of a fancy term for giving a child hope that their best days are yet to come because of their life circumstance and how that's manifesting itself in the schools. Address significant disruptions in the regular education classroom. So that's the why for our proposal. What is the role for this person? Well, the primary role is going to be to work with faculty and staff to promote a positive learning climate for students that reinforces expected behaviors from all students, and then systematically across the district as well. And that's a tier 1 slicing, a little bit into tier 2, kind of a model for that person and the students and the work with those students. How will the PALS contribute to the school community then? Well, this is a person who will participate in, now here's a real tier 1 piece, and notice we haven't really gotten to tier 3 yet when it's in our description here. This person is going to participate in the recognition and affirmation of students who are successful at meeting their social, emotional, and behavioral goals. And they're going to help that at a building-wide level, but also at a student-by-student level as well. Because one of the things that we know about student achievement right now is that when you look at what needs to occur for a child really to have that academic achievement that we're always talking about, if you've got kids who don't believe their best days are yet to come, if we've got children who have some significant mental health needs and so forth, having that extra person in their life who knows who they are and what their name is, what their specific plan is, having helped develop that plan, implement that plan, check in with the kid, this kind of a thing. That gives children, with these needs, the opportunity to see themselves through someone else's eyes instead of their own eyes, which typically is why children with great needs like that don't achieve. And so this is kind of a tier 1 again, tier 2 piece. So who will PALS provide support to? The PALS position will demonstrate considerable patience, empathy, and ability to work with at-risk regular education children in a manner that teaches self-regulation in any event. And it's that self-regulation piece that's really, really significant. And this gets down to your tier 2 or tier 3 level of support for children. We do a really, really good job when we identify kids for tier 3. In fact, I look at the resources in the elementary schools. If you look at any elementary school, special education's there. I mean, I have to have at least 10 FTE, depending on what their needs are. And that's not always somebody who's always in my building, but I mean, special education has got a lot of support. Tier 1's got a lot of support too. The classroom teachers and the responsive classroom, and we've got all of these other PBIS concepts and so forth. are really well supported, but that middle road kid who doesn't qualify for unidentified children with needs, there's really nothing there for them. One of the things that this PALS position would do would be to do a lot to preempt and prevent referrals to special education with our regular education students who have needs. And that's who that person will support. And you know, it's really tied to regular education kids, because the support is there for everyone else. Okay. Where will the focus be? It'll be focusing on social and emotional needs of growing at-risk population of students. And then the question becomes, why now? Well, you know, Michael and I were putting together our slideshow here, and it occurred to us that, you know, I'm just so impressed with how often we always go back to our mission statement in Northfield. And here Matt and Dr. Richardson can talk about that. And what it really comes down to is that if we have the intention to empower all kids, and there are some children who are getting caught in the cracks, and we're not giving them necessarily what they might need to be successful because the resource isn't there. And so we'd like consideration of the PALS position in each of our elementary schools to promote our mission statement, and that's to deliver educational excellence that empowers all learners to participate in our dynamic world. So that's the 30,000-foot log. So I'll open it up to questions.
And I'm wondering if maybe Michael could share just a little bit about thinking about your elementary position that you were in before in Rosemont Apple Valley. Kind of give us kind of a sense of what that looked like and felt like in terms of your work with staff and with students in the building.
I promised I was just the eye candy for the
Yeah,
presentation.
I realize that, but I want them to know you have a voice.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair.
Okay. It's all good.
Okay. For 2 years, I was in a position in elementary. They called a behavior specialist. And the backbone of that position was exactly what you saw here on this presentation. We are in a business of building relationships with students, and frequently we give about 90% of our attention to about 10% of our students. And I think that a role like the PALS would keep in the forefront of all of us that, you know, there are students that have rough days here or there, or based off their background, they'd have that ability to build a relationship with someone and connect with somebody. My role was primarily helping regular ed students, but once in a while, if you needed to support special ed students, you would do that as well. A lot of what I did was coaching teachers in positive behavior interventions, giving them suggestions on how to support students that were struggling. Just giving the teachers also an advocate, you know, when their bag of tricks is starting to run pretty thin, coming in and offering some suggestions for supports, or taking a classroom so that a teacher can do an intervention with a student. You know, frequently when you ask for support either from admin or from a counselor, a lot of times that student is removed from that situation and the teacher kind of gets disempowered. If you think about the follow-up that they might not be able to do because they're busy teaching, a role like this would be somebody who would have experience being in the classroom and could help out in that way and provide teachers an opportunity to build that relationship if needed as well.
Well, so I guess what we wanted to do tonight is just to share, again, that kind of deep view and really let you ask questions that you might have. Again, this is one of those pieces that we need to come back to you with if you're saying, yeah, I want to hear more, I want to hear some detail about how this might play out, what kind of staff we look at. We actually have been working on developing a job description around this particular piece. Which we're really looking at someone who is a teacher on special assignment, because part of what we know has to happen is for these folks to be effective, they've got to have street cred with the kids and with the teachers in the building. But our sense was we didn't want to run too far down the road if you came back to us and said, why in the world would we need to do this, or why is this important? The other thing I guess I would share with you is just from my own experience, and Michael shared with his in Rosemont, but when I was in Osseo, we basically had almost the exact same individual behavior specialist that was available in each elementary building. The real difference with elementary buildings is that they do not have counselors. They typically do not have assistant principals. So you're really down to, it's the building principal.
Social worker.
And if you're lucky and everything, the world is spinning rightly, you can have a social worker help support that. But the reality is most of the time, if there's a crisis situation or help is needed, the building principal has to stop whatever they're doing and run to that setting. And that could end up being 10 minutes, could end up being 3 hours. And so what we saw in Osseo with this process was that by doing an approach like this, we gave the opportunity to really help support kids who are not special education kids but might be having some really tough situations going on. And this could be, you know, an outburst, it could be, you know, a behavior piece, it could be I'm under my desk and I'm not coming out, it could be I'm really depressed or upset, it could be a lot of the things that are happening that not only impact that student, but impact every other kid in that classroom, because at that point, if there's not support, either, again, the building principal has to remove the individual, disempowering the teacher, or the teacher has to spend an inordinately large amount of time with that one student to the detriment of all the other kids there. As Dave said, we already do have support for our highest needs special ed kids, and in many cases we have EAs that come directly with the student to help support their needs. We really don't have anything at all like this, and we're not looking at that kind of level of support, but we're really thinking this really kind of makes sense. And the other thing is, I would say in the 35 years I've been involved as a school administrator, as a superintendent, that this is the point in time where teachers are saying to a higher level than I've ever heard before, and building principals to a higher level than I've heard before, we are really concerned about the social emotional health of our building and the needs of the kids and the unmet needs that we have, and we're feeling like we're firefighters. All we're doing is putting out fires. We're not really coming up with replacement behaviors or replacement approaches to make that happen. So, but we'd like to ask questions, and then again, what I'm looking for at the end of this is more, is this something that is worth us generating the next level of detail in terms of what these positions might look like, how they might be distributed around the building, and how we might approach putting this in place. And always the question the board should ask in the end is, where's the money come from to make this happen?
Ellen? So I guess I would first say I would be very interested in hearing more, of course, wanting to know where the money comes from, but what I'm excited about is that it's looking at the social emotional learning and thinking about the students that, you know, we haven't been able to address. And we had these fantastic presentations about MTSS and PBIS, and the open question as a board member is, well, what's happening at the elementary? And it seems like this would bring that safety net there, and it works really well with Northfield Promise and sort of the kind of joining with the community on these pieces. So I guess I'd be really interested and excited to hear more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments? No.
I'd like to hear more. And one thought is there collaboration in this position with the parent?
Well, actually, that'd be a key component.
I would think so.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So if you have a child in crisis, and you have to take that on a kid-by-kid basis, and so to have that resource for parents.
That's built in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think the thinking is the person that we'd be looking at here would be a person that had gotten multiple types of training. So they probably they'd have CPI training, they'd have cognitive coaching training, they'd have training on working with supporting and creating replacement behavior strategies. And that would not only be to sit down and work with a student in terms of saying, well, when you're feeling like this, is there another way you can share how you're feeling? But you're also talking to the teacher to say, when the student is behaving this way, is there a way you can change the direction of that student's behavior? And we had talked about the idea of actually having the person also support professional development for teaching staff and buildings, and also to provide opportunities for parent education, again on a building by building basis. again, it's this idea of having someone as well connected in the building and as well known in the building as opposed to, you know, we bring somebody in from outside and they're there for 2 hours and we never see them again.
Margaret?
I'm all for it. I'm thrilled. I think, and piggyback on what Cheryl had said earlier, is the earlier you can teach a child a skill, the better. You know, it's better than finding out a skill in 9th grade versus you can catch them in 2nd grade. I would also be more interested in collaboration because finding out what's going on. And is there something we can collaborate with Northfield Promise or Healthy Community Initiative to find out why are these kids so stressed? And where are these issues coming from? And maybe helping the community address some of those issues.
I think we spend a lot of our time looking at the behavior part of it, and even tonight talking about the consequences that come through. But the ABCs of this is you gotta put time and energy into antecedents too. You have to figure out what's causing the maladaptive behavior, the decision-making process, what's been wired, and so you have to get to the root of that by communicating with parents, offering suggestions, working with staff so they understand that, you know, this little guy or this little young lady, they're having that rough time because of that, and sometimes just having that information and collaborating with people is a huge part of it. I think of this role as being way more proactive than reactive. You know, we could spend a lot of time talking about how we're going to deal with this, or, you know, modifications to, you know, a citizenship handbook, but this gets to the root of all that before you ever have those conversations. Obviously, I have skin in the game as the middle school assistant principal, you know, and we're talking about having conversations with 6th grade students who come in, and a lot of times they don't have the same coping mechanisms. They don't understand what it's like to be in a building with 970 people. I spend a lot of my time building relationships with students and teaching some of the social emotional skills so we don't have as many behaviors. And I feel like that, you know, that time and effort's definitely paid off. And so I would love to see a role like this in the elementaries, also taking that time to build that relationship, getting to the antecedents of why students are making the decisions they are. So.
Other questions or comments? Yes, I thank you for being here, and Michael, it's great that you have this background and you're able to share that experience with us. I think that will be key, and we will look forward to hearing more. Do you have any idea when that you would come back?
Very soon.
Okay, I assume.
Very soon.
I assume.
So
Have to be at the next meeting.
I think you will hear about this again at the next meeting. We actually have a job description to look at. We'll talk about costing, and we'll also talk about should we potentially try, you know, a pilot strategy, or are we ready to jump in terms, because obviously, just like Cheryl's piece earlier, you know, there's the 300,000 foot piece, or there's a lower cost piece that maybe is a right first step, and I think we may want to think about are there any other ways to do this to get it started and get it moving. But I do think in the end, again, my experiences in the past have been, and I think the more diverse our community becomes, and the more needs that we're seeing kids demonstrating, the more important this is going to be for building principals and for teaching staffs to basically have that kind of direct support to work with the kids that are in their building that aren't eligible for special education support, because there's a significant number of kids. And as I said, I think I've heard this at almost every cabinet meeting for the last 6 months to a year. We need to figure out how to get at this, and I think we have now kind of swung into a position where we think we know what we want to do, and we will come back to you with a detailed plan quickly.
I would be remiss also to, I would never want to tarnish Joel's reputation, but you'll notice that this slide right here is much more pretty than the one in your handout. That's the downfall of having a Google Doc where you let Joel Lear have permission to edit it. So I want to just apologize from our committee.
So Joel, what did you do to it?
He had to go respond to a crisis, and if he left it there, if you look at your packet, there's a little.
Yeah.
So he put his notes in it
And then he left.
and then didn't come back and.
Well, Anita was so efficient, that's when she ran it, so.
Yes.
Right.
That's it, yeah, that's second
I take what I get, just let
Okay then.
It's fine, we actually saw it, but we were getting
Gentlemen,
far
thank
too
you.
late. We were all being far too late. Yes, thank you very much, and we appreciate you bringing this forward, and we will look forward to the next board meeting. And we will hear more. Okay, so,
And now a person needs no introduction.
now, exactly. So we'll move on to sort of shift gears a bit here and begin with Val Mertsdorf, Director of Finance, talking about the proposed 16-17 non-operating fund budgets.
Now to the really exciting stuff. So I think this is a record number for budget presentations. And
Yes.
You can see them all.
And they're all leaving.
I'm really used to that, it's okay. So tonight.
Well, wait, are you handing out money? Are you handing out money? I'll stay.
Yeah, otherwise-
Later, I will,
yeah,
if
later.
you stay.
Yeah,
All right.
if you stay to the end.
So tonight I'm doing 3 budget presentations actually. So we'll start with the non-operating funds. Debt service is up first. So just a reminder about what the debt service fund is for. It is basically, we levy for our bond payments, pay our bond payments, and that's it. We are required by state statute to levy 105% of what our scheduled debt payments are. And we do have some offsetting operating capital revenue for one particular capital facility bond. So that's the total sources of the revenue basically. And then again, like I said, just the funds can be used to pay the principal and interest, and then any fees associated, they charge us $400 each time we have to make a payment. So that's really it in a nutshell. It's pretty self-contained. The expenditure summary, I have a couple of years of actual where we're budgeted right now, and then what we're proposing for 16-17. It's pretty clear. We've been in a really stable pattern the last couple of years. The 13-14 actual, as a reminder, has the payment of our advance refunding, the $9.9 million, so that's why that year looks so much higher. 14-15 through now is more normalized than what we would expect in just a normal year-to-year operation. So for 16-17, we are looking at about $4.265 million in principal payments, just over $1 million in interest, and about $6,000 in fees. So $5.2 million total for expenditures. The revenue side, as you can see, majority is just the property tax levy, 4.765. We get a little bit of interest on that, but not significant. And then we do have some tax credits from the state that offset part of the levy. So $4.8 million for the proposed revenue. And so when you put that all together, again, the 13-14 beginning fund balance is very high because of that refunding that we paid off. The 1.4, we're gonna end at 1.1, that's a little more normal for our district. Again, just revenue and the expenditures, I would expect in a normal year, 800 to 1.2 million to be our normal fund balance range for this particular fund. Really straightforward fund, not a lot going on. So the principal and interest schedule, just so you can see the actual bonds that we are paying on, and the principal and interest that make up those totals that you saw on the previous slide, and when they'll be maturing. You will note that we have one that will be paid off this coming February for about $1.3 million will be our final payment on that. What I would like to point out is the $5.268 million that's total for this year, while we're paying off 1.3. If you look at the total, our principal payments are pretty consistent from year to year, even though we're paying off a major bond, and that was on purpose for consistency for the taxpayers. We scheduled our debt payments so that one of our more significant ones, the principal we're paying doubles in 17-18 basically, to keep that consistent so that we don't have taxpayers seeing huge shifts from year to year in what they have to pay. So overall, I mean, all things considered, by 2025 we would be debt-free, but as you're well aware, that's not likely to happen. But that's where it stands right now today. So, but we do have about $40.3 million outstanding right now. So that is debt service in a nutshell. Any questions on that specifically?
I just have a quick comment that this is really helpful, and I've referred back to the one from last year because as we've been talking about facilities, I don't know if other board members are getting that, but it's really helpful to know, the principal interest schedule and be able to explain to community members why that we, and I love the narrative of that you include with this, but the maturity schedule as well, that's really helpful for community members. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, other questions?
I just have a comment. I'm just always so impressed with the work that you and this administration do on, especially the long-range planning and really doing such a great job of keeping us even and somewhat predictable given the rarities of your world. And I just really want to thank you guys a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, no other questions? Okay.
Okay. I'll keep cruising through them. The fiduciary fund, as you may remember, is basically our scholarship fund. We keep it completely separate so we can track the money that we get in from the donors and the money that goes out for the scholarships. So it's just a singular fund and that's all it accounts for. We have, the guidance office is actually the one that coordinates all of it. She tracks down everybody that wants to donate and the recurring ones and all the scholarships that were awarded. And so that's a really big undertaking for them. We do have about 85 scholarships from 50 different donors, and we are the fiscal host for about 50% of them. So the list that you see in here is not even all of the scholarships that we provide, just to make that distinction. So the financial summary, this fund is extremely consistent. There's very little, we've had really consistent donations. For 16-17, we're projecting about 73,000, a small bit of interest, and then about 77,800 for expenditures. I do expect the expenditures to be a little bit higher than the revenue we're bringing in because we do have a couple endowments that we received, so we got a lump sum, and then we're paying out the scholarships over a period of time. So I would expect that to be consistent for the next several years while we pay those down. So ending at 129,000. But that's really all there is to it. Here is the list of what we know at the current time. There's always people calling, and I shouldn't say always, but we do have people that come in and want to do scholarships later in the game. But right now, this was kind of the list that we have going for the ones that we're anticipating. So, any questions on that one?
Any questions for them? We want to move on to the community services budget.
All
right.
I thought you were just running on your own, Val.
I tried to do that.
She tried.
Thank you.
Okay, so tonight I am also going to be presenting community services on behalf of Erin, who is on some well-deserved leave with her new little guy. So Erin and I worked on this February and March-ish, getting everything ready before her leave. So just a reminder of what the principles of community education are. Lifelong learning is something that we talk about a lot, and they are very focused on that. Maximizing community and school resources, maximizing community and school facilities, promoting collaboration and partnerships, and citizen involvement. And you will see through the next several slides that they do a fantastic job of living up to all of those. Just a couple highlights for you from fiscal year 14-15, 40,827 children, youth, and adults participated in a community services program. That's a really big number, which is awesome, and it's also a 9,000 person increase over the previous year.
Wow.
98,763 people had access to a school district facility through community services. This is nearly a 15,000 person increase over the previous year. Community services provides scholarships to 237 program participants in 31 program areas. So really just amazing numbers on their part. So just a recap of some of the program components that they provide: adult learning, lifelong learning, basic education, driver's ed, Project ABLE, and recreation services. For youth programs, the Middle School Youth Center, the Kid Ventures programs, youth development and service learning, the Connected Kids mentoring, and recreation for youth as well. Since 2011, the total annual participation in rec programs has increased by 65 programs and 1,144 people. So they are just growing by leaps and bounds. More program components: early childhood, ECFE, screening, hand in hand, bridges to K. I'm not going to read them all because you can read them on your slides, but very involved with everything and in tune with what the community and the school district needs. The budget goal for community services is something that they've had now for a couple of years, to work towards an overall fund balance goal that equals 2 months of the community services operating expenses without any of the 4 fund balances exceeding 25%, and this comes to about $486,000 roughly. As a reminder, their 4 fund balances that they have are ECFE is a separate fund balance. They have a general community ed fund balance, sort of a miscellaneous one, if that's what you'd like to call it, and school readiness. So those are the 4 categories that they have to track their fund balance by. And the 2 months of operating expenses is consistent with the board's goal for the general fund as well. So they're trying to keep in line with that. So just the fund balance history. I really enjoy this particular graph.
It's your favorite graph.
Yes.
Yes.
As you know, 09 and 10 was obviously some tough years with the economy, and people obviously don't want to enroll in pay participation fees for things that are kind of just extra and above what they would normally have. So they made some programmatic changes and budget cuts and tough decisions, and you can see that it's obviously been very successful and they've managed the budget very well. So for fiscal 17, for the budget assumptions, the revenues, just maintaining revenue for any fee-based activity. That's something that we like to hold flat, just because it's a big fluctuation potential. There was an increase in state aid for ECFE programming and school readiness. The ECFE formula was actually tied to the percent increase in the basic formula. So the 2 and 2 is now a 2 and 2 on the early childhood formula as well. It's $136.80 per census, and so that 136 gets a percent. So instead of only getting an increase when they had an increase in enrollment, they'll now have an inflationary increase attached with that, which will be very helpful. And then school readiness also had a significant increase in the last legislative session. There was $30.75 million allocated for school readiness, and that formula is a lump sum that the state allocates, and then it's whatever your percentage of age 4 students is as a percent of the whole state, and then another part of that is your percent of free and reduced students as a percent of the whole state. So our percentage didn't really increase or change significantly, but we went from about $48,000 to $95,000. So that was a really significant increase for the school readiness funding. The continuation of the Pathway 1 and 2 early learning scholarship funding, and multiple grant applications is where they've done every year. The expenditures, obviously salary and benefit increases, continuation of the $10,000 partner funding with HCI, and there will be an additional section of Hand in Hand next year and an additional early ventures preschool room. The Hand in Hand classroom, just so you know, is not a new physical space, it's just an additional section. But the early ventures preschool room is an actual new classroom that they are creating. So.
Is every single square foot of space available in Longfellow? Is
Yes.
full?
Yep, they are
Okay, and credit.
maxed out. So, which is great. It's wonderful to have programs, early learning programs that are bursting at the seams. I think that was on that one. So just a breakout of the revenue sources. The state aid and the local levy dollars is obviously driven on the state legislature. That is going to total about $701,000 of the budget for next year, about 28%. Participant fees, enrichment, rec, ECFE, most all of their programs have some kind of participant fee, is about $1.3 million or 56% of their budget. Grants submitted is $122,000 or 5%. And other local sources is about $269,000 or 11%. The other local sources includes things like the payment from the city of Northfield for our recreation program. And we are the fiscal host for the Rice County Family Services Collaborative. Those all kind of go in that miscellaneous bucket, just to give you an idea what's in there. And this is just the same information, just in a graph chart. So you can see very clearly that participation fees is the major driver of their revenue, and the fund balance goal is crucial to being able to weather, those fluctuations in the economy. And I would say very similar to our motto with the general fund, and the things we tell is, we want to keep as much of our programming as long as we can and have that consistency for our community. So this is their projected fund balance ending this fiscal year is about $460,000. The total revenues we're anticipating is about 2.461, and total expenditures of 2.428. So we're looking at revenue over expenditures of about 32,500. So their projected fund balance for next June is just shy of 493,000. Which is about 20% of the total expenditures. So right on track, a little over of what their estimated goal was. So. And then this slide is something that she's included every year, which I think is really important as a reminder of all of the expenditures that directly benefit our school district and the K-12 operations. I'm not going to go through all of them line by line, but it's a significant list, and the total's not on there, but it's $997,923, which is 41% of the total community services budget is going to directly benefit K-12 operations. I'm not sure why the total's not on there, so I apologize for that. But that's really significant in showing their commitment to the district. As we've kind of talked about, there's a lot of variables in their budget. actual program enrollment is their biggest driver, 56% of their revenue. Actually collecting the fees that they're charging is another portion of that. And the grant funding, $120,000 in grants every year is a significant commitment to seeking other sources of revenue. So a little bit about the Greenville Park Community School. Due to it's a federal grant, and so it's actually considered part of the general fund, so it's not included in the total revenue expenditures that I presented. But obviously it's an important part of what community services does and helps facilitate that. So the fiscal 16 funding, this is where we're currently at. The actual 21st Century grant is the federal grant, that's the $92,000. Which is obviously the most significant portion. And we've had several grants that help support that as well. There's a statewide health improvement grant, Alina Health, Neighborhood Health Connection. We've had donations of snacks from the Just Food Co-op and then Emmaus Church. So a total of $107,000 is the total budget for this year that we're looking at. Next year to date, currently we only have secured the 21st Century grant because it was a 3-year grant. So that is $94,000. But I know they have several grants outstanding that they're waiting to hear on. So this is, there are 2 goals with the 21st Century grant. One being the number of students enrolled, which means they've come 6 or more times. And the second goal is the number of students that have come 30 or more times. So the red line is kind of showing that first goal, 1 to 5 times. Anything to the left of that doesn't really count towards the goals. Everything to the right counts towards the goals. So total participation is 422 students. And the participation for the grant is 223, so far exceeding the expectation, which is fantastic. And these numbers, just so you know, are as of March 14th, so not even very current, so I'm sure they're much higher than that today. So this is basically the same information for middle school and high school attendance specifically. It says through 5/5/15. I'm assuming that the one I have is updated, so this is actually from June 15th through March 14th. So I think the numbers are a little different on mine. But for the middle school and the high school students, they have to attend 11 times to count towards enrolled attendance numbers, and they've seen a dramatic increase in the number of middle school and high school students participating this year. So the numbers I have, and I'll get you these updated numbers. I'm not sure why I don't have them on here, but the 1 through 10 times is 53. 11 to 19 is 34, 20 to 29 is 39, and 30 plus times is 30. And as you can see, last year we were at 0 for 30 plus, so that's a significant increase. Okay, I have like a whole nother slide on community school, so I'm just going to talk about it because it's not in here. It just talks about the attendance targets. So 175 Greenville students take part in the activities is the MDE goal. We've had 266 Greenville Park students and 369 total with the middle school and high school. So 175 to 369, far exceeding that goal. 130 students must attend 30 plus days during the program year. 110 Greenville Park students and 140 total with middle school, high school. And then 28 students 5th grade and older. We've got 15 Greenville Park students in 5th grade that have attended and 45 with middle school and high school. So we have met and far exceeded every single one of the goals. and these again are all as of March 14th. So very exciting to have that that significant of an increase in investment. And I did actually I was on an email the other day that said Education Minnesota had visited this fall and had tabbed it as one of the 5 most developed community services models in the state. So really fantastic.
And as a result of that, they're helping or trying to help us with some additional funding.
Yes.
Because there is a piece of funding that is in the legislative package that is tied to community schools. And originally they had written the language, so again, only Minneapolis and St. Paul could participate. And so they were able to get language modified to include looking at schools that already had a community school in them or that were Title I eligible.
Yeah.
They had written it in a way previously that because we don't belong to an integration district, that they pretty much had cut us out of being able to get funded. And I'm surprised and pleased that EM was willing to kind of step in and say, you know, that's not fair. And I think it was because they had been out and had a chance to visit and saw the quality. I'd also say to you that's the piece that when we had the folks come out from the Department of Education, they were so impressed by the work that we've done that they wanted to send other people to see our program. And it is really the combo of community services and the staff in Greenville Park have really made that thing go. So it's all good.
How much of our revenue is state aid?
For the community services budget, well, she has it in aid and levy, and it's 28%, and I believe the aid is much higher than the levy. So I'm going to say probably in the 18 to 20% range.
Close enough.
Other questions or comments for member staff? Okay. Val, thank you. Yeah.
You're
The
welcome.
last piece about community school is a great way to end, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's just all good.
Fantastic.
It's all good.
Good job.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes.
That concludes our
let's see,
reports for the night.
after 2 hours and 26 minutes, we have concluded discussion and reports. So I think we've worked our way admirably through that portion of the board meeting. So we'll now move to items for individual action. And the first item is the reduction in or modification in world language classes.
So I think he's behind the curtain.
Back for an encore is Mr. Joe Lear. He just can't get enough of us.
I think that's it. I think that is it. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to.
Hold the mic up.
Pull the mic up.
Sorry. I appreciate the opportunity just to kind of summarize the memo that I've sent to you. And I would just point out, as I mentioned in the memo, that my intention would be to identify the recommendation for both Chinese and for Spanish language specific to, I'm going to call them the pipeline courses, looking at how we service the students that are already in the pipeline for Chinese 2 and 3, and then also looking at the students in Spanish 6. And if you recall that the question regarding Chinese 2 and Spanish 6 were related to the low numbers, specifically 6 in the Chinese 2. And 8 in the Spanish 6. So, and I will say that I'm going to offer up 2 recommendations quickly, but both of them I have to give credit to the members of the department who are impacted by these questions, because they very much went into problem-solving mode as opposed to, just kind of staring at it in with concern, but said, look, what can we do about this to fix the issue? So the options that we're looking at come directly from those staff members who are most impacted by these questions. So specific to Chinese, I guess my recommendation would be that we utilize 0.2 FTE for the purpose of a combined 2-3 course, which gives us an opportunity to have a viable number in that section, but also continue all of the students who exist in the Chinese pipeline as it is now, and to recognize the fact that they have they have already begun the program, and that we would move them forward. So a section of 2-3 Chinese, and then, as is our typical pattern, not to offer the Chinese one this year as part of the world language offerings. In terms of the Spanish piece, and again, I would point out that this was really about problem solving and how could we do things differently, better, in a way that honors those students that have been in the program. And in the case of Spanish 6, been in the program since elementary school in the Nero's program here in the district. So my recommendation would be that we dissolve the Spanish 6 curriculum, and in its place add the AP Spanish literature. What that does, and we had Lori Rossmiller, who is our Sarah Martins, who is our AP teacher, allowed us to do a survey in her class of students who would normally be registering for that 6, and 3 of them indicated that if we switched from a Spanish 6 curriculum, which is a locally created curriculum, to the AP Literature curriculum that's designed by the College Board, that they would then, as a result of that, register for that AP Lit class. So that would raise the number up to 11. Then we've also been talking with our students who are registered for the AP Language, and if I get these right without twisting them around, I'll be amazed with myself. But those that are signed up for the language class, which has been in place, that we have a number of those students who would be interested in taking the literature course next year instead. So what that does is, we talk about unintended consequences, this would be an unintended benefit, is that by offering the AP course, we essentially give 2 high-end offerings to those upper-level Spanish kids that are interchangeable. So we can actually really solve a class size issue in the AP that we just thought we'd have to live with 37 students in that section. 37 is just one of those numbers that's too small to split and too big to leave, and so sometimes we have to err on the side of leaving, unfortunately, with the finite resources we have. So we'll look to get as close to balancing those 2 AP sections as we can, but just knowing that if we can pull 6 or 7 students from that class, then we have a very reasonable number in the Spanish language and a viable number in the Spanish Lit class, both of those with the AP credential attached. So those would be my 2 recommendations for that piece.
Joel, just to clarify, again, as we take a look at the AP Language and the AP Literature, they are not sequential, they're complementary. So a student who takes AP Literature first is not going to be disadvantaged in comparison to a student who takes AP Language first. So there is that capability of hopefully balancing the numbers between the 2, but giving students who are wanting to take higher level courses in that area the opportunity to get 2 full sets of AP credits in Spanish before they graduate from high school.
Right. And I do want to be clear too that, obviously the language curriculum is something that we're far more familiar with, at least our department members are familiar with. So I do, when we talk about balance, obviously a perfect balance would be something like 24-25 between the 2, but we also want to get to know the literature curriculum enough to be able to say, even though they're not sequential, there may be certain students where they are at with their language development and language study that are more apt to be successful at this point in the literature class, and kind of tip toward those students participating in that class, than if there are students that are better served doing the language first and then the lit. So we want to be cognizant of that piece, because certainly we don't want to move students arbitrarily and then set them up at a disadvantage, just dependent upon where their language development is.
And again, just share what will the instructor need to do before they can teach AP Spanish literature.
Sure, there are 2 essential components. The AP, the College Board requires an audit process, which basically is a series of steps that ensures the College Board that the curriculum offered in that AP course is indeed the curriculum that is approved or recommended by the College Board. So there's a submission of the syllabus and curriculum, and then an approval process. It's just called the AP audit. And then once that class is approved, then we can award that AP credential to the course, and then the instructor that's intended to teach that course will attend we have the incredible luxury of the AP Institute being here at Carleton College each summer. So we'll have the opportunity to access that as well. So.
Yeah, we have a great advantage here in terms of, for years and years, Carleton has taken on that summer training role for the advanced placement courses. And so we literally have dozens, if not hundreds of people that are showing up every summer taking additional training in those classes. So.
Then the only piece that I would just add, and I apologize for interrupting there, Chris,
No
is
problem.
just the note I have under the Chinese language piece, the long-term consideration is just the recognition that longer term, in other words, over the next 12 months, would appreciate the opportunity to engage the board, or at least members of the board, in the discussion that essentially brought this up 2 weeks ago in terms of what is the long-term interest and viability of a 4-language offering at the high school. So that's not something I'm asking you to decide certainly tonight, but that you'd be willing to engage in that conversation so that we can kind of have an intended plan as we move forward.
Okay, board members, these are an item for individual action. I would like to proceed with taking each separate. So we would first address the Chinese language. If there's a motion. Ellen?
So I'll move that we adopt move to approve the .2 FTE assigned to Chinese language program for one section of a combined Chinese 2-3 course.
Second?
I'm sorry. Do you want moved it? So I moved that's the
Approve
the option one.
Does that include discontinuing Chinese 1 during the 16-17 school year then?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have a motion. Is there a second? Second by Fritz. So any discussion?
A question. So we could offer Chinese 1 next year potentially. Okay.
Yeah,
17,
17,
yeah, right.
18.
Yeah, meant, yeah,
17,
17, 18.
You'd have
And-
2 grade levels then that would be
Mhm.
there to see if we can create enough enrollment there to make that work.
And then given Spanish, if we replace 6 with the 2 AP courses, there's still, any student seeking a BA in college with that 4 consecutive language requirement would still be able to meet that within our high school curriculum.
Okay, we would have opportunity to ask other Spanish questions too during that motion. So the motion on the floor now is about the Chinese program. Rob?
So the combined 2-3 course, then you'd have 6 students, I think it was, who are in the 2 who wouldn't be able, likely wouldn't have the option to take 3 the following year. So it seems like we're putting off a problem, so we at least need to manage the expectation that if you take 2 this year, it's likely that that's the end of the line.
Right, and that's where I think it's important that we engage that conversation in terms of kind of the long-term viability during the course of that year, so they understand what to expect. Yeah.
And Rob, are you just asking too that maybe as those students register for that 2 course, that some kind of, they just letting people know at that time?
Yeah.
Well, but I think it's also important to understand that if those students are in fact students who are sophomores right now, and they take 2-3, again, when they're seniors, there could be the option to go back to a 2-3 combo in the same way we've done that before, another year out. So the rotation on this, I actually, it was scary, Joel. I generated a chart that I showed you this afternoon, just to try to make sure I could make it work.
Right.
But the reality is, if our enrollment in Chinese 1 would pick up enough kids between new 9th graders and 10th graders the following year, that would generate our 1 class.
All right.
And then another year down the road, then those kids would be eligible for 2, and the students who would now be seniors would be eligible to take 3 in a combo class. So the potential is there still to maintain those. We have to see how the enrollments work, and I think that's the thing that I think Joel's being very upfront with you about is, we're trying to do what we can to maintain this, but we also have to take a look long-term as to how those numbers But there are mathematical ways that all of those things could actually continue with that rotation. And I have a chart if you'd like it, but I'm not gonna bother with it otherwise.
Do board members have any other questions or discussion before we move to a vote? Okay, so just to restate the motion, there will be a .2 FTE assigned to the Chinese language program for one section of a combined Chinese 2-3 course, and discontinue Chinese 1 for
during the 2016-17 school
Year.
Okay. All right, so everyone, that's the motion
Like
before
full
on the floor? Okay, so, no further questions or discussion, then we'll, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so let's move to the second motion, which, if there's a board member, ready to move a motion regarding the Spanish language program for 16-17. Ellen?
So I move, we support option 3, which is dissolve Spanish 6 curriculum and replace with AP Spanish literature. Facilitate the further balanced enrollment between the Spanish AP literature course and the current AP Spanish language course by working with students to identify the non-sequential. I don't think we need all of that, but
The whole
Just end it with
option 3.
place
Yeah.
of AP Spanish
Yeah.
lit, period.
Okay, so the motion is dissolve Spanish 6 curriculum and replace with AP Spanish literature. Is there a second? No? Second? Discussion, questions? Ellen?
So my question has to do with philosophically how this fits in with the Compañeros program that was beefed up. So way back when we beefed up the program, we envisioned that the students coming up the pipeline were going to be further advanced. We know that the students in the high school aren't those students, but they had a little bit more of a beefed up curriculum, not the approved one.
Right.
So what I'm wondering is, it has to do with setting expectation. I think I appreciate all the work that went into this. My concern is just one of the parents that spoke at the last meeting about the expectation when we start in first grade that we'll always be able to offer courses through the senior year. And I guess I'm a little concerned I don't know that there's any more AP Spanish besides the 2 we'd offer. That if these students that are coming up the pipeline might really leap ahead, that this might not be something that we can promise forever, right? Because if those, I don't know what we think of those students. I think, are they 6th graders now?
They are 6th graders.
If we have any indication of how this is gonna change, it seems like they're in a stable path until they hit high school, and then, we may or may not have offerings. If this is part of the thought process, or if we just haven't gotten that far.
Right, I think, in the hypothetical sense, I think we would certainly plan to be ready for those student needs, all the way through their experience here. I do know that in talking with some of the Spanish department members, that's the evolution of the Compañeros program to include the literacy piece that was essentially meant to kind of shore up what students were getting to middle school and high school with a real significant lead in terms of verbal skill, but in terms of their grammar and written, well, basically everything except the verbal, wasn't as far as advanced. So, when I first came to Northfield, I kind of wondered, so they have a multiple year head start and they finish a year ahead. Well, they're way ahead verbally. They're not way ahead in all the other dimensions of language study. And so what I think that the middle school teachers will really be key to, and I'm not looking at my colleague Greg, he might disagree with me. No, I don't think you would disagree, but they're going to be key in terms of their analysis of how those students are fundamentally different, more advanced in certain areas, less advanced in others, so that we can then use that information to inform how we prepare for those students. So philosophically, yes, we absolutely want to be ready for them. We also want to be ready with the right tools. So I would argue that multiple AP offerings in a town with a program where students are able to start learning Spanish as first graders makes a lot of sense. And I think that our Spanish 6, I've had formal and informal conversations with department members who were ready to take a look at that and examine the curriculum there. Because again, it was a local curriculum. built after an AP level course. So it was a little bit of a class that I think for a number of years just kind of we've looked at and said, well, I wonder what that wants to be when it grows up. And I think that those students moving through the pipeline in 6th grade are going to force us to really answer that question in a very official way. So absolutely, we want to be ready for them. My intention would be that we're able to serve them just as we are able to serve the students now.
And I think the literature piece is the natural complement, because we think about literacy as being the core strategy that we were trying to address, a reading, writing, speaking, listening approach, as opposed to just the speaking piece. That having the literature requires us to have students who are going to be demonstrating higher levels of skills in terms of reading and interpreting and understanding the things that they read as well as what they hear. So I think it actually is the perfect complement to the Spanish 5 AP language class. And just, again, something I appreciate, Lori and others really kind of thinking about, is there a better way to do this at this point? Plus, I think it'll give us a very clear, curriculum and structure in that literature that didn't really exist before with Spanish 6.
Excellent. Other questions, comments board members have before we vote on the motion? Okay, so we have the motion, we have a second. All those in favor of the motion, which reads, dissolve Spanish 6 curriculum and replace with AP Spanish literature, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. I just wanted to say that I think, Joel, what I appreciated most about the approach and the memo was really the way you were able to articulate the sort of all of the objectives that have to be considered. And I think when we have, it's very challenging. And I honestly have, as a board member, have great appreciation for trying to build a master schedule. And I think as a high school with such comprehensive offerings and the having to balance that against optimum class sizes in the face of real financial limitations, I think I appreciated you articulating really the balancing act that you have to do. And with that being said, I think we came up with a really good solution, and I think we're able to really look at an opportunity that presented ourselves to us that I think is a really good solution long term. So thank you to everyone, to the Spanish department, to Galahong, and to Joel, who were able to put this together. So thank you. Okay, we will now move on to the second item for individual action, resolution proposing to place tenured licensed staff on unrequested leave of absence.
So board members, as you recall, there I mentioned at the last board meeting, really kind of a 4-step process in terms of looking at staffing and so on and so forth. And last meeting we approved the potential reduction of various departments of 0.4 FTE in the Spanish department and a 0.2 FTE in our department. When we move forward with that, what we need to do is then attach names to those reductions, and what we just talked about, what you just approved, reduces the need to reduce Spanish in half. So despite being able to add the AP Spanish literature, that solves a 0.2 portion of that reduction. But it's, Joel, I believe it's Spanish 3 plus that is the other. Is it Spanish 3 or 3 plus where there's 3 plus where we just don't have as many students for the number of sections for next year. So it still necessitates a 0.2 FTE reduction. And in this case, in the Spanish department, there are no probationary teachers. So what we need to do is use the seniority process in terms of reducing an individual's tenured contract by 0.2 FTE. In this case, you'll see that the resolution before you indicates that that individual would be offered a 0.8 FTE contract for next year. And this is still step 3 of 4. So we proposed placing this person on unrequested leave for 2/10 this evening. Not the next meeting, but the following meeting, you would come back, and if there's, maybe there's some piece that happens between now and then where it does not, is not necessary. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. But at that point, we would, at the second meeting in May, formally place the individual on unrequested leave. And then yet again, there may be some opportunities between now and the beginning of next school year where other things arise where that may not be necessary. But we have to continue to take these steps to ensure that we're meeting all of the appropriate timelines as outlined by the NEA Master Agreement.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So there is, the motion is to place the teacher, as listed on unrequested leave of absence effective at the end of the 2015-16 school year. Is there a motion to approve that recommendation? Moved by Margaret, second? Second by Noel. Any other questions or discussion? This is a roll call vote.
Bogat? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yes.
Okay. Hardy?
Yes.
Iverson?
Yes.
Colangelo?
Yes.
Quinnell?
Yes.
Stratmon?
Yes.
Pritchard?
Yes.
Motion carries.
So we'll move on to third item for individual action, which is a contract between Northfield Public Schools and Prairie Creek Community School. Something we never thought we would be coming to in our lifetime.
And again, I'm watching our time because I want us to be out here at 10. So this is your visual. You got the 23-page version, which is just the contract. This is the contract with all of the exhibits that were required as part of the process, including about a 50 to 60-page evaluation document and other elements that they requested as far as the MDE and the Charter Schools Center. We went through at least 4 iterations of this document, had great help and support from Matt and from Simon Tyler at Prairie Creek in terms of working through this process, and just received last week the word that this version met all of their requirements. And we did that purposefully up front of saying, we're going to keep sending you drafts till you tell us it's right. So because we want to be able to get it approved by our board and Prairie Creek's board, and it will be ready to go. So I will announce that despite a significant amount of additional work, it is a finished product. And not only is it a finished product, but it is now the template that we can use in the future, not only for Prairie Creek, but for Arcadia, because now we have the structure, we know exactly what needs to be in it and exactly how it needs to play out. To give you an example of how much this has changed, the contract, as you remember, originally in the last couple of contracts was 10 pages long. The contract itself is 23. Our evaluations in the past were 3 or 4 pages. We did a very general, but I think appropriate evaluation of their performance. Now we have to get down to the details of everything, including ultimate or overall proficiency, as well as growth, as well as MMR scores, as well as measurements in terms of all the other components. And again, Prairie Creek has done an excellent job. And so we are at a point where I would like to recommend to you that you formally approve this contract with Prairie Creek for the next 5 years and pronounce it finished.
Board members, is there a motion?
I move that we approve the contract with Prairie Creek.
Second, is there a second?
And it's a 5-year contract.
Second. Second by Ellen. Okay, any questions or discussion? Chris?
I read it.
Yes.
It reads like innocuous boilerplate. It all makes sense to me. Were there any changes from the last contract that are meaningful? I didn't spot any.
No. The reality is the contract itself, everything we had in the 10-page document covered everything that needed to be covered. But what we found is, how do I say this kindly? How many days of work, Matt? This is the Department of Redundancy.
I get that part.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure.
But
that
no,
within
did
the
not.
redundancy
And
department.
I think what's important to note is that we reached out to some other charter schools who had their contracts successfully approved by the department, because we are operating under a different set of rules than the last time that we had a contract approved. So rightfully so, Dr. Richardson's first question was, who has a contract that has been approved? Let's take a look at that and see what kinds of things we can do to make it work for us.
And even with that contract, we found there were a number of things that had changed between last year and this year. But all of those are done. So, no, my sense is there's not any really substantive change in terms of what Prairie Creek is expected to do. I think we both have a very, very clear understanding of the evaluation components that are going to be included. And my belief is that because Simon and I have worked very carefully and together on this, that we have a set of evaluation documents that he feels comfortable he can provide us the data, and I feel comfortable I can come to you and say it met all the requirements that we needed to have to be able to come back and approve it formally. So I'm pronouncing it well and good.
And similarly, I didn't spot anything that looked like it would have been an item of contention between you and Simon. I assume that was all
Absolutely
essentially
zero.
straightforward from the last time as well.
We've had my relationship with both Simon and Ryan and now with Patrick has been great. And so, no, they are very willing to look at what has to be done, figure out if there are things that need to be in place in order to satisfy the department, and put those pieces in place. And as I said to them, I said, let's make sure that we have things that you feel are reasonable measures and that you can really report on, so that when we do the evaluation of that report, you're not saying, I have no idea why I'm gathering this piece of data. But there's as you can imagine from looking at that listing of all the exhibits, how many more specific pieces of data are being requested now than have ever been requested before in order to get this done. All good.
Other questions? I think this is a good time to say thank you to everyone who put this together. This has just been amazing.
All good.
Over the course of your 35 years as a superintendent, this might rank as one of the, I would hope, something you're most proud of, because this is a lot of effort and
I
there
am
was a lot
proud.
of
I'm proud that it is done.
As well you should be, and that you survived it. Yes.
Well, and that beyond that we now really have, I think, a viable template to use with the department in order to get the next one done.
Which
because,
is July this summer, correct?
It starts in July through next spring. The following spring is when Arcadia is up for their 5-year review.
Okay, good. So, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Yay. Okay, so, another item, revised school board policy 721, grant writing. As you recall, board members, we had the first reading of this policy at our last board meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, so there's a motion to approve revised school board policy 721, grant writing. Is there a second? Seconded by Margaret. Any questions, comments, discussion? Okay, none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to consent grouping. We'll move on to the approval of consent grouping. As a reminder, there were some personnel items in the table file to be added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping? Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Noel, second? Second by Rob? I'm sorry. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. So, let's move on to items for information. This is the really fun part of the evening, because we get to talk about the community,
Short amount of time.
the retirement celebrations for Dr. Richardson. Lots of information will be forthcoming, but I do want to get on everyone's calendar the celebrations we have planned for Dr. Richardson. So they are starting to take shape, actually, and so we have some dates. We will do a community and school district staff celebration on Tuesday, May 31st from 5 to 8 p.m. at Carleton White Center with a program at 6 p.m. So we're extremely grateful to Carlton for agreeing to have the event held at the White Center. They have been excellent to work with, and feel very fortunate that they can help with that, with your celebration. In addition, then, we will also have a reception for just school district staff, Wednesday, June 1st, from 3:30 to 5 p.m. with a program at 4 p.m. at the Northfield High School upper cafeteria. So, just to be clear, school district staff will be invited to the event at White Center, as well as having their own opportunity to celebrate with Dr. Richardson at the high school. So, again, there'll be more information forthcoming for board members and the community. Yes?
Calendar question, ALC commencement is usually that week too, do we have the date for
It's
that?
the next day, June 2nd.
June
At
2nd.
7 o'clock.
Actually, there is a change to that, yes. The ALC graduation is being held on June 2nd.
Yeah, last year it was held at Longfellow in the afternoon, but, I mean, there hasn't been a change for this year. I'm not, just to be clear on what you were saying. So, yeah, it's Thursday, June 2nd at 7, here in the high school auditorium. They had to move out of Longfellow. They don't have the chairs anymore. Right, Mary?
That's correct.
That's right.
That's correct.
And when we said we were straining at the seams at Longfellow in every single way, in terms of trying to find locations to put tables in place when we don't need them.
And then high school graduation is that Sunday, the 5th, at 2 o'clock.
The thing is, some of you can remember back to when that is where we traditionally had the ALC graduation. It used to be in the high school auditorium when the ALC was located over at the NCRC. So,
Excellent, thanks
just coming home.
for reminding us all
Yeah.
of that. And Danita's always really good about reminding us of those dates.
It's on the
but-
agenda for next time.
There you
Always
go,
is.
you jumped the gun, but that's
There
good.
you
Jump the gun, Ellen.
That's okay, because it's, this time of year it gets very, very crazy, and I know, one of the, I think, best things that I do every school year is attend the ALC graduation, so I know that board members really always want to make that event. So as a reminder, future board meetings Monday, May 9th, and Monday, May 23rd at 7 p.m. in the high school media center. Okay, after exactly